The hardest part about watching your own flesh and blood get raided by the federal government is trying not to spill your coffee. I sat in the back of an idling armor-plated Suburban, the cool leather pressing against my spine. Through the tinted glass, I watched the tactical boots of the Diplomatic Security Service hit the manicured pavement of my childhood home. Red and blue strobes painted the pristine white columns of the Silicon Valley estate, casting harsh shadows across the drought-resistant flora. My father stood on the porch, his jaw hanging slack, the unearned confidence draining from his face like water down a drain. My mother clutched her throat, her designer pearls digging deep into her skin. I took a slow sip from my thermos. The dark roast was bitter, earthy, and perfectly grounding. 24 hours ago, the only thing brewing in this house was a lethal dose of suburban entitlement. Just yesterday, my father had looked me dead in the eye and proudly announced he sold my home because I never used it. He sat there wearing a smug grin, boasting about funding my older brother's new tech venture with my property. My mother did not even blink. She just took a slow sip of her Chardonnay and told me I should be thrilled to finally contribute something meaningful to the family. They thought they had cornered me. They thought I would cry, beg, or throw a tantrum. Instead, I just gently placed my coffee mug on the saucer and waited. They had no idea the empty house they just forged the deed to was a federally protected diplomatic safe house. Before I reveal how my parents accidentally triggered a national security crisis to spoil their golden child, drop a comment telling me your age and hit that subscribe button to support Amanda Told Stories. We bring you the most intense, real-life stories every single day. My name is Eileen Haas. I am 34 years old, and for the past decade, I have handled sensitive Pacific Rim negotiations for the State Department. My career demands silence, discretion, and long periods away from the West Coast. To my family, my absence was never a sacrifice for public service. It was merely an inconvenience to their perfect aesthetic. I had arrived on Christmas Eve for my mandatory 48-hour holiday leave. Pulling into the circular driveway, the property loomed like a monument to engineered perfection. Inside, the air smelled of imported pine, roasted organic root vegetables, and artificial warmth, the kind of warmth you buy from high-end interior decorators, not the kind you feel in your chest. My parents, Paul and Diane, were holding court in the foyer. Their eyes tracked the mud on my boots, lingering just long enough to make their disappointment the loudest thing in the room. They bypassed me entirely, keeping their attention fixated on my older brother Cameron and his wife Brooke. Cameron possessed the effortless, untroubled posture of a man who had never paid for a single misstep. He leaned against the kitchen island, swirling a glass of biodynamic Cabernet, pontificating about synergy and phantom seed rounds for a company that produced nothing but press releases. Next to him, Brooke shifted her weight constantly. She was Caucasian, meticulously blonde, and deliberately angled her body so the interlocking logo of her belt caught the recessed lighting. She possessed a laugh that sounded like breaking glass, sharp and designed to draw every eye in the room. I slipped through the heavy oak front door, dropping my canvas duffel bag with a muted thud on the entryway rug. Diane turned her head just a fraction. "Eileen, you made it. We were not sure you could secure the time off from whatever administrative desk they have you chained to this year." "Pacific Rim Logistics, Mom. Good to see you too." I sidestepped the welcome hugs that were never coming and carried my bag down the hall to the guest room. The space felt sterile, stripped of any lingering memories of my youth, replaced by neutral tones and abstract art chosen by a catalog. I unzipped the canvas, reaching past folded blouses to extract my lifeline. It was a specialized, encrypted satellite phone. The device was heavy, encased in reinforced matte black polymer, built to withstand a blast radius rather than slide into a sleek evening clutch. I set it gently on the nightstand. Diane had followed me down the hall to inspect my packing habits. She sighed heavily from the doorway, the sound dripping with performative exhaustion. "Are you really bringing that ugly brick to the dinner table again, Eileen? It looks like a relic from the Cold War. Why can you not just purchase a standard smartphone like Cameron? His new tech incubator just gifted him the latest model." "Security protocols," I replied smoothly, ignoring the familiar bait. "It stays with me." Diane waved a manicured hand, brushing away my reality like a pesky fly. "Always with the paranoia, just like that ridiculous house of yours down in Santa Barbara. We drove past it last month, you know, still sitting there, empty, gathering dust. I do not understand why you bought a place with those bizarre, unnaturally thick walls anyway. The aesthetics are dreadful. It looks like a bunker." I kept my face perfectly still, betraying nothing. She had no idea how accurate her assessment was. The walls she despised housed a lead-lined classified communications server room, deeded through a complex government blind trust. It was not a quaint coastal vacation home. It was a highly secure federal facility. "It suits my needs," I said, offering a tight, polite smile. My singular goal was to survive the next 2 days without engaging in a shouting match. I planned to eat the dry roast no through Cameron's inevitable bragging and board a flight back to Washington. But as I followed my mother out to the dining room, a distinct shift in the atmosphere made the hairs on my arms stand up. The air felt heavy, charged with a strange nervous energy. Paul and Diane exchanged a fleeting conspiratorial glance. It was a look I recognized from childhood. It was the smug, self-satisfied smirk they shared right before handing Cameron the keys to a new car while presenting me with a savings bond. Paul stood at the head of the long oak table, his chest puffed out under a tailored cashmere sweater. The dining room table was set with fine china and polished silver glistening under the chandelier. He picked up his crystal wine glass, a silver spoon hovering just inches from the rim. The tension in the room thickened, transforming the holiday cheer into something sharp, calculated, and precarious. "Everyone gather around Paul," announced, his voice echoing off the vaulted ceiling. He tapped the spoon against the crystal. Clink, clink, clink. "I have an announcement to make, something that will alter this family's trajectory forever." I took my seat, placing the heavy black phone face down next to my plate, unaware that my father was about to pull the pin on a grenade of his own making. The crystal rang with a sharp, clear note that silenced the ambient hum of the dining room. Paul stood at the head of the table, his posture radiating a profound, unearned authority. The warm glow of the chandelier caught the silver spoon in his hand, casting fragmented reflections across the roasted vegetables and untouched organic turkey. My mother, Diane, leaned forward, her eyes bright with an anticipation that made my stomach tighten. Cameron adjusted his collar, wearing a smirk that suggested he already knew exactly what was about to happen. "I want to propose a toast to family," Paul began, his voice projecting as if he were addressing a crowded boardroom rather than a dining table of 5. "This year has been a year of immense growth and strategic maneuvering. We always say that a family must operate as a unified front, supporting the visionaries among us to elevate the entire legacy." He gestured generously toward my brother. "Cameron here is on the precipice of something truly revolutionary. His new startup is going to change the tech landscape. But as we all know, true genius requires capital. It requires seed funding to break through the noise of Silicon Valley. And as the patriarch of this family, I realized it was my duty to secure that future." Brooke beamed, reaching across the tablecloth to rest her hand over Cameron's. The overhead light caught a thick, dazzling tennis bracelet on her wrist that definitely had not been there when she arrived. I watched the interaction, feeling a cold knot form in my chest. Paul turned his gaze toward me, his expression shifting from paternal pride to a patronizing pity. Now, Eileen, Paul continued, his tone dripping with condescension. We know you live a very modest, isolated life. You have that demanding bureaucratic job, and you lack the time to manage real assets. That beautiful property in Santa Barbara has just been sitting there, rotting in the salt air, gathering dust while you travel. It was a wasted resource. So I took it upon myself to solve your little abandoned property problem. The dining room fell into a heavy, suffocating silence. The air seemed to thin out, making it difficult to draw breath. I found a buyer, Paul declared, a triumphant grin spreading across his face. A very wealthy, highly motivated tech investor named Derek. He fell in love with the coastal location. We executed a highly lucrative lease-to-own contract. The down payment alone was staggering, and since you never used the place anyway, we funneled that initial capital directly into Cameron's incubator fund. You are finally contributing to this family in a meaningful way, Eileen. You should feel proud. I did not scream. I did not throw my napkin or push my chair back from the table. My body simply froze, every muscle locking into place as the sheer, unfathomable magnitude of his stupidity crashed over me. I reached for the porcelain coffee mug resting beside my dessert plate. My fingers were remarkably steady. I lifted the mug, took a slow, deliberate sip of the dark liquid, and set it back down on the saucer. The ceramic made a soft, hollow clink against the plate. That tiny sound echoed in my ears like a gavel striking wood. My mind raced through the federal statutes Paul had just casually admitted to violating. The Santa Barbara house was not a vacation home, and it was certainly not abandoned. It was a classified, federally protected diplomatic safe house. The deed did not even exist in a traditional public registry. It was buried under layers of government blind trusts, monitored around the clock by the Diplomatic Security Service. The structure itself was retrofitted with lead-lined walls to prevent electronic surveillance, housing secure servers that transmitted sensitive data across the Pacific Rim. To sell that property, Paul would have had to bypass federal oversight, commit identity theft, and execute wire fraud on a staggering scale. He had just handed the keys to a United States intelligence asset to an unvetted stranger. Cameron leaned back in his chair, swirling his wine. It is a win for everyone, Leanie. My developers are already working around the clock. When the company goes public, I will make sure you get a nice little return on your unintentional investment. Consider it a favor. You were drowning in property taxes anyway. Brooke chimed in, her voice shrill and grating. And honestly, Eileen, it is about time you shared the wealth. Cameron works so hard, and you just sit on empty real estate while playing government secretary. I looked at my family, truly seeing them for the first time. They were not just toxic or entitled. They were dangerously, breathtakingly ignorant. My father stood there, puffing out his chest, expecting gratitude for committing treason. If I confronted them with the truth right now, if I revealed the federal nature of the house, Paul would panic. He would hire lawyers, destroy evidence, and attempt to hide his tracks before the State Department could secure the perimeter. I needed him to confess to every single detail of his methodology. I needed him to dig the hole so deep that no expensive defense attorney could ever pull him out. To do that, I had to give them exactly what they expected to see. I had to become the pathetic, helpless daughter they always believed me to be. I lowered my gaze to the tablecloth, letting my shoulders slump forward. I allowed my breathing to turn shallow and erratic. I gripped the edge of the table, making sure my knuckles turned white, projecting the image of a woman whose entire world had just collapsed. Dad? I stammered, letting my voice crack perfectly on the syllable. You sold it. You actually sold my house. Paul nodded, mistaking my tactical retreat for genuine devastation. Handled the paperwork myself. Smooth and easy. I forced a tremor into my hands. But I needed that house, I whispered, staring blindly at my cooling dinner. You do not understand. My finances are a mess. The cost of living in Washington is burying me. I have mounting debts, Dad. Terrible debts. I was planning to use the equity in that Santa Barbara property to secure a consolidation loan next month. It was my only safety net. If that house is gone, I have nothing. I am going to lose everything. The dining room shifted. The smugness rolling off Paul and Cameron intensified, filling the space with a palpable, sickening arrogance. My calculated display of weakness was the ultimate validation of their superiority. By pretending to be a financial failure, I had neutralized any threat they might have perceived. I was no longer an angry homeowner. I was a desperate, drowning bureaucrat crying over spilled milk. Cameron chuckled a low, dismissive sound. See, this is exactly why Dad had to step in. You do not know how to leverage your assets, Eileen. You were just going to take on more debt. We took a stagnant property and turned it into liquid capital for a high-yield venture. That is how real wealth is generated. Brooke rolled her eyes, adjusting her diamond bracelet so it caught the light again. Really, Eileen, please, do not ruin Christmas by crying about your credit card bills. It is incredibly depressing. We are supposed to be celebrating Cameron's success. I kept my head bowed, hiding the cold, predatory focus sharpening in my eyes. I let a single, pathetic sniffle escape my lips. But how did you even do it? I asked, my voice trembling with feigned confusion and defeat. How could you possibly sell a house that has my name on the deed? The title company would have stopped you. The bank would have flagged it. You cannot just sign away someone else's property. It is impossible. I cast the bait straight into the water, knowing my father's colossal ego would never allow him to miss an opportunity to brag about his own cleverness. He viewed himself as a master manipulator, a man who could outsmart any system. Paul chuckled, a deep, rumbling sound of pure condescension. He took his seat at the head of the table, smoothing his cashmere sweater, thoroughly enjoying the sight of his daughter begging for answers. He picked up his wine glass, taking a slow, celebratory sip. Nothing is impossible when you understand how the system actually works, my dear, Paul said, a cruel, satisfied smile spreading across his face. You think a few pieces of paper can stop a motivated man from protecting his family? You underestimate me, Eileen. You always have. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table, eager to explain his brilliance. He had completely dropped his guard, basking in his perceived superiority, my father prepared to walk willingly into an invisible, inescapable federal trap. Paul settled back into his custom-upholstered dining chair, thoroughly savoring the distinct flavor of his own perceived brilliance. The warm dining room light caught the silver threads in his hair, framing him like a statesman delivering a historic address. He swirled the expensive red wine in his crystal glass, watching the dark liquid coat the sides, entirely unaware that he was about to deliver a recorded confession to multiple federal felonies. Under the table, out of sight, I shifted my weight. I kept my shoulders hunched, maintaining the fragile, defeated posture they expected to see. Slowly, deliberately, I slid my right hand off my lap and moved it toward the heavy black satellite phone resting face down beside my plate. My fingertips traced the reinforced polymer casing, searching for the tactile grooved button on the upper left edge. I pressed it twice in rapid succession. A faint, nearly imperceptible haptic pulse vibrated against my skin. The encrypted audio recorder was now live, capturing every breath, every clink of silverware, and every word spoken in this suffocating room. The data was streaming directly to a secure cloud server located in a heavily fortified bunker outside of Langley. It was a matter of basic logistics, Paul began, his tone remarkably conversational for a man detailing grand larceny. You spend 10 months out of the year hopping between Asian time zones. Your official mail, your bank statements, your property tax notices, they all get forwarded here, to the estate. You entrusted me with holding your correspondence. I simply decided to act on the information instead of letting it gather dust in the study. I kept my eyes glued to the half-eaten organic turkey on my plate, forcing my voice to stay small. But the deed, I murmured. The county records. You cannot just bypass the government. My father let out a low, patronizing chuckle. He leaned forward, resting his forearms on the pristine white tablecloth. You can bypass anything if you construct the right bypass. A traditional sale requires escrow, exhaustive title searches, and layers of bureaucratic red tape. That takes months. Derek is an innovator. He moves fast. He wanted the keys immediately, to begin renovations and customize the space, so I structured it as a highly specialized lease-to-own agreement. He paused, taking another sip of wine, clearly enamored with his own cunning. The structure is brilliant, Paul continued, gesturing with his free hand. Derek pays a staggering upfront premium, which gives him immediate physical possession of the property today. The official title transfer does not trigger in the county system until the final balloon payment is made 2 years from now. By that time, Cameron's incubator will have launched the IPO, the company will be publicly traded, and we can easily pay off whatever pathetic consumer debts you are currently crying about. No red flags, no immediate government scrutiny, just liquid capital flowing exactly where it needs to go. I swallowed hard, masking my profound shock with a convincing sniffle. And the signatures, I asked, letting my voice waver perfectly. How did you get Derek to accept a contract without me being in the room? Paul waved his hand, dismissing the question as trivial. Eileen, I have been forging your signature on report cards, permission slips, and medical forms since you were in the 2nd grade. It is muscle memory at this point. I know the exact loop of your letter E better than you do. But it has to be notarized. I pressed, playing the part of the desperate, confused victim to perfection. A lease of that magnitude requires a certified witness. This time, Cameron answered. My brother leaned back, crossing his arms over his expensive tailored shirt. Honestly, Leanie, you think too small. Dad just called Mitchell over at the country club. Mitchell owes us a ton of favors after Dad bailed out his landscaping business last spring. A nice holiday bonus, a bottle of rare scotch, and Mitchell stamped his official notary seal on the entire stack of documents without batting a single eyelash. He did not even read the cover page. I filed that name away. Mitchell just earned himself a decade in a federal penitentiary for facilitating the theft of a United States intelligence asset. Every sentence they spoke wove a tighter noose around their necks. The sheer symbolism of the forgery washed over me heavy and suffocating. My father had literally overwritten my identity. He had taken a pen and erased my autonomy, transferring my hard-earned independence into fuel for his favored son. In this house, I was not a person with rights, a career, or a future. I was merely a raw resource to be harvested whenever Cameron encountered a financial hurdle. Brooke let out a loud, theatrical sigh, shifting in her chair. The movement caused the heavy diamond tennis bracelet on her wrist to catch the chandelier light, sending sharp, brilliant fractures of illumination dancing across the dining room walls. Can we please change the subject? Brooke complained, her voice sharp and grating. Eileen, you are ruining the entire festive mood. You are sitting there moping over a dusty old house while we are trying to celebrate a major milestone. Look at what Cameron surprised me with this morning. She held up her wrist, shaking it slightly, so the stolen diamonds jingled against each other. It is flawless, Brooke preened. Cameron said it represents the bright future of his new enterprise. So, instead of acting like a tragic victim, you should be thanking us for finally putting that stagnant property to good use. You are part of a winning team now. Act like it. I stared at the sparkling stones, calculating exactly how many federal statutes covered the purchase of luxury goods with laundered foreign funds. Brooke is right. Cameron chimed in, picking up his fork to point it directly at my chest. You need to adjust your perspective. Your little government salary is never going to generate real wealth. You push paper for a living. I am building a digital empire. The capital from your house is just an early inheritance, really. Mom and Dad were going to leave the bulk of the estate to me anyway, to manage the family legacy. We just expedited the timeline. My mother finally spoke, offering a soft maternal smile that failed to reach her cold eyes. We are doing this for your own good, sweetheart. You have always struggled to understand the bigger picture. Cameron has vision. You have a desk job. It is simply the natural order of things. I listened to them assassinate their own futures. My face remained a mask of total calm, betraying none of the predatory calculations running behind my eyes. I did not feel anger anymore. Anger requires an emotional investment, a belief that the offending party might one day understand your pain. I had none of that left. I only felt a cold, surgical precision. They had freely confessed to wire fraud, identity theft, and conspiracy, all proudly recorded on a device they mocked as a Cold War relic. The trap was set, perfectly baited, and they had swallowed the hook down to their stomachs. I was just about to ask Paul for the exact dollar amount of the fraudulent wire transfer to solidify the grand larceny charge, when a distinct sensation stopped the breath in my throat. The heavy black phone resting face down next to my plate vibrated. It was not a standard buzz. It was a rapid, erratic pulse. 3 short bursts, a long pause, then 3 short bursts again. My heart hammered against my ribs. That specific haptic pattern was hardwired into my brain during grueling survival training at the Diplomatic Security Academy. It was a level 1 alert. A faint pulsing red light began to bleed from under the edges of the phone, casting a sinister glowing halo against the pristine white tablecloth. The light throbbed in time with the silent alarm. A perimeter breach. Someone was not just at the Santa Barbara house. Someone was actively penetrating the exterior defenses. The psychological tension in the dining room spiked, instantly transforming the air from a suffocating suburban drama into a ticking time bomb. The lease-to-own contract had not just granted a wealthy tech investor the keys to the front door. It had granted an unknown entity direct physical access to one of the most sensitive intelligence nodes on the western seaboard. I stared at the bleeding red light on the tablecloth, the reality of the situation rapidly eclipsing my family's petty greed. My father had not just stolen my property. He had sold state secrets. The pulsating red light throbbed against the pristine white linen of the dining table, a rhythmic heartbeat of federal emergency. My family remained oblivious, absorbed in the intoxicating glow of their own self-congratulations. I casually shifted my heavy cloth napkin, letting the fabric drape over the edge of the table to conceal the glowing halo. With smooth, practiced movements born from years of high-stakes covert operations, I slid the heavy polymer device off the wood surface and safely into my lap. My thumb instinctively traced the biometric scanner on the side of the casing. The screen illuminated instantly, the brightness automatically dialed down to a covert anti-glare minimum. I opened the dedicated diplomatic security interface. The classified application bypassed standard commercial cellular networks, establishing a direct encrypted uplink to a geostationary satellite orbiting thousands of miles above the Earth. 6 high-definition camera feeds populated the small screen. The Santa Barbara property looked peaceful from the exterior vantage points. Thick coastal fog rolled off the Pacific Ocean, blanketing the cliffside and obscuring the quiet neighborhood. But Camera 4, strategically hidden inside the primary structural corridor of the house, painted a terrifying, chaotic picture. Derek, the supposed wealthy tech investor, who had charmed my father, was not walking around the living room taking measurements for new custom granite countertops. He was standing in the center of the hallway, wearing a military-grade tactical respirator. 4 men dressed in unmarked black utility gear surrounded him. They were not holding drywall saws, standard sledgehammers, or any typical renovation tools. They wielded specialized, high-intensity thermal cutting lances. I zoomed in on the live video feed. The intense, blinding blue-white flame of the lead thermal drill chewed through the standard outer drywall in a matter of seconds, exposing the hidden secondary layer of military-grade, reinforced steel underneath. Civilian contractors do not own thermal lances. Civilian contractors do not wear tactical respirators to knock down a simple hallway partition. Derek was not a technology bro looking for a relaxing coastal retreat. He was a highly trained foreign corporate operative. His primary target was not the valuable California real estate. His target was the classified Pacific Rim intelligence servers housed safely behind that thick steel wall. By blindly handing over the keys to secure a quick illegal payday for his golden son, my father had inadvertently facilitated a staggering foreign espionage operation on American soil. The implications were chilling. Those servers held encrypted negotiation transcripts involving Allied naval blockades, delicate international trade embargoes, and the covert positions of intelligence assets scattered across the South China Sea. If those drives fell into the wrong hands, operatives would die, decades of careful diplomatic maneuvering would evaporate, and the geopolitical landscape of the entire hemisphere would destabilize. The foreign team was moving methodically. Because Paul had granted them a fraudulent lease, they believed they had months of uninterrupted privacy to slowly dismantle the structural defenses. They had no idea the house was a digital fortress that instantly notified Washington the moment the outer perimeter was compromised. Through the encrypted audio feed on my device, I could hear the distinct ear-splitting screech of the thermal drill biting into the structural steel. The harsh metallic sound grated against my eardrums, pulling my mind backward in time. The sensory memory hit me with the crushing force of a physical blow. I was suddenly back at the grueling, high-stakes diplomatic security survival training facility, deep in the remote Virginia woods. The deafening, rhythmic crack of simulated automatic gunfire echoed loudly through the humid, suffocating air. I remembered the bitter metallic taste of mud and adrenaline in my mouth as I low-crawled under jagged barbed wire. Brutal instructors screamed directly into my ear, demanding focus, while concussive flashbangs detonated in the dark distance. I remembered the heavy, crushing weight of a 60-pound tactical vest pressing against my lungs, teaching me the necessity of maintaining a cold, unyielding mindset when national security hung by a fraying, fragile thread. That intense auditory memory was suddenly, jarringly interrupted by a pathetic, high-pitched whine originating from across the dining table. "Mom, you cut this wrong," Cameron complained, his voice dripping with profound, childish indignation. I blinked slowly, my tactical focus snapping back to the warm, opulent dining room. My 36-year-old brother was poking at a beautiful cut of holiday steak with his polished silver fork, wearing an expression of unmatched tragedy. "You sliced it with the grain instead of against it," Cameron whined, pushing the expensive porcelain plate away in dramatic disgust. "The texture is ruined now. I cannot eat this. Tough meat. It is like chewing on a cheap leather boot." Diane immediately rushed to his side, her face tight with genuine, overwhelming panic. "Oh, sweetheart, I am so incredibly sorry," she cooed, placing a comforting hand on his broad shoulder. "The private chef must have rushed the carving process before he left. Let me take that plate back to the kitchen and fix it for you right now. I will cut a brand new piece from the center of the roast. Just be patient, darling." I stared at them, the sheer absurdity of the moment making the air in my lungs turn to ice. In my lap, a high-resolution screen displayed hostile foreign agents inches away from compromising United States intelligence. Across the table, a grown man was throwing a ridiculous tantrum over the texture of his organic beef, comforted by a mother acting as if a minor culinary misstep was a catastrophic life-or-death emergency. The juxtaposition was physically nauseating. My family lived in a heavily insulated, impenetrable bubble of manufactured problems and artificial stakes. They weaponized passive aggression and measured human worth by designer logos, country club gossip, and superficial milestones. They had zero concept of the real world, the dark currents of geopolitics that I navigated every single day of my adult life. I cast my eyes back down to the hidden screen. The thermal lance flared much brighter on the video feed. The digital temperature reading on the structural steel was spiking dangerously high, flashing red on the right side of my display. The outer layer of the secure Faraday cage was glowing a fierce, angry orange. They were less than 2 inches away from breaching the lead-lined server room. The safety of the nation was literally hanging in the balance, resting precariously on the melting structural integrity of a reinforced wall in Southern California. The tactical strike team was already in motion, but they were still minutes away from intercepting the foreign operatives. I had to maintain my cover. I had to keep my family talking, keeping them stationary, and unaware of the apocalyptic storm gathering directly above their heads. Eileen! My father's booming voice shattered my intense concentration. I slowly raised my head, locking my expression into a mask of mild, pathetic confusion. Paul was staring down the length of the table at me, a deep, angry frown carving harsh lines into his forehead. He held his crystal wineglass aloft, clearly annoyed that my attention had momentarily drifted away from his grand performance. "I just explained in detail how I saved you from financial ruin," Paul demanded. His chest puffed out with arrogant, unearned pride. "I secured the future of this entire family by taking your useless property and turning it into a thriving, liquid asset. I took a significant personal risk navigating that complex lease-to-own structure for you. Behind the scenes," he took a step away from his chair, pacing slightly, to command the room. "The least you could do is look me in the eye and say a simple thank you," he lectured, his tone dripping with paternal disappointment. "I solved your mounting debts. I funded your brother's brilliant enterprise. You should be thanking me, on your knees, for my financial genius. You would be lost without my guidance." I stared in silence at the man standing at the head of the table. He wore a tailored cashmere sweater and a luxury watch he bought specifically to impress his wealthy golfing buddies. He truly believed he was an unstoppable mastermind, a brilliant patriarch, flawlessly maneuvering his family toward ultimate prosperity and endless wealth. He was nothing but a profoundly useful idiot. A chilling, perfect clarity washed over my entire being. I did not feel any lingering daughterly affection for this man. I did not feel the familiar dull sting of his lifelong casual rejection. I only saw a catastrophic security liability standing across from me. He had happily traded decades of his freedom for hollow vanity. To secure a quick injection of cash for his lazy, entitled son, Paul had committed international treason. Paul waited for my gratitude, his chest rising and falling beneath his cashmere sweater. When I offered only a silent, steady stare, his triumphant smile tightened into a thin, impatient line. He reached inside the breast pocket of his tailored jacket, retrieving a folded sheet of heavy legal paper. He snapped it open with a sharp flick of his wrist. "I have one final piece of administrative housekeeping to conclude tonight," Paul announced, his tone shifting from boastful patriarch to ruthless corporate negotiator. He smoothed the document flat against the pristine white linen right next to my untouched dinner plate. He then retrieved a heavy gold fountain pen from his pocket, unscrewed the cap, and placed it deliberately on top of the crisp white page. I stared at the thick black ink forming dense paragraphs of legalese. It was a retroactive quitclaim and indemnity agreement. "Go ahead and sign at the bottom, Eileen," my father instructed, tapping his manicured index finger against the signature line. "It is a standard post-dated waiver. It simply states that you willingly surrender any remaining equity, legal rights, or future claims to the Santa Barbara estate. It also officially indemnifies Cameron's new holding company from any potential liabilities arising from the transfer. Just a formality, really, to tie up the loose ends. I looked from the gold pen up to his expectant face. You want me to sign away my rights to protect Cameron from liability? My brother scoffed from across the table, swirling his wine with a lazy flick of his wrist. Do not make it sound so sinister, Leanie. It is standard business practice. Startups are delicate ecosystems. Investors need absolute certainty that no disgruntled family members are going to crawl out of the woodwork and lay claim to the foundational assets. We are building a unicorn here. I cannot have your messy consumer debts bleeding over into my corporate valuation. This document just builds a necessary firewall. Brooke nodded vigorously, her diamond bracelet sparkling under the chandelier. Honestly, it is the least you can do. After Dad went through all the trouble of bailing you out and arranging the lease, securing Cameron's future is your moral obligation. You owe them for raising you, paying for your state college tuition, and keeping a roof over your head all those years. It is called loyalty. You should try practicing it. The sheer audacity of her statement hung in the warm, pine-scented air. Brooke, a woman who had never worked a day in her life, was lecturing me on loyalty while wearing stolen jewelry funded by a foreign espionage ring. I did not reach for the pen. Instead, I placed my index finger against the edge of the heavy legal document and slowly pushed it across the smooth tablecloth, sliding it back toward my father. I am not signing that, I stated, my voice dropping an octave, losing the fragile tremor I had maintained for the past 20 minutes. The calculated weakness vanished, replaced by a flat, unyielding authority. Paul narrowed his eyes, clearly interpreting my refusal as a pathetic, last-ditch temper tantrum. Eileen, do not be difficult. We are offering you a clean break. I provided for you your entire life. I paid for your braces, your textbooks, your modest little sedan when you graduated. Family duty dictates that you reciprocate. You owe this family your cooperation. Sign the paper. I kept my hands resting gently in my lap, right next to the encrypted satellite phone that was currently broadcasting this entire felony conspiracy to the federal government. I decided to offer them one final, absolute warning. One last opportunity to demonstrate a single shred of humanity or basic common sense before the hammer dropped. I looked my father directly in the eyes. The air in the dining room grew incredibly still. Dad. I began my tone eerily calm, devoid of any daughterly deference. I want you to stop thinking about Cameron's startup for exactly 1 minute. I want you to focus very carefully on my words. Do you have any earthly idea what is actually inside those thick walls in Santa Barbara? Paul stared at me, his brow furrowing slightly before a loud, booming laugh erupted from his chest. He threw his head back, thoroughly amused by my question. The sound was harsh, echoing off the vaulted ceiling, dripping with absolute contempt. Oh, please, he chuckled, wiping a theatrical tear from his eye. Do not try to inject some pathetic, dramatic flair into this conversation. What is inside those walls? Let me guess. Black mold, termites, faulty wiring you were too cheap to fix. It is a decaying, overpriced coastal box, Eileen. It is nothing special. You are not special. My mother slammed her wineglass down onto the table. The sharp crack of crystal hitting polished wood made Brooke jump. Diane leaned forward, her face twisted into a mask of vicious, unchecked resentment. Your father is right, Diane spat, abandoning any pretense of maternal affection. Stop trying to make yourself sound important. We know exactly what you do, Eileen. You push paper at a bureaucratic, dead-end job. You stamp passports and file logistical reports for a government that barely knows your name. You have zero ambition. You have no husband, no children, and no real prospects. The only valuable thing you ever possessed was a piece of real estate you did not even know how to maintain. She pointed a trembling, manicured finger at me, her voice rising to a shrill crescendo. You are just jealous. You have always been jealous of your brother. Cameron is building an empire. He is charismatic, visionary, and destined for true greatness. And you are just a bitter, lonely woman trying to ruin his success because you cannot stand the fact that he outshines you in every conceivable way. You are a failure, Eileen. Signing that paper is the only way you will ever be useful to this family. The venom in her words was palpable, coating the dining room in a thick, toxic residue. For 34 years, I had carried the exhausting weight of their expectations. I had endured the subtle slights, the missed birthdays, the blatant favoritism, and the constant grinding pressure to shrink myself so my brother could appear larger. I had always harbored a tiny, stubborn ember of hope that one day they would see me, that they would recognize my sacrifices and love me for the woman I actually was. As I sat in the glow of the crystal chandelier, listening to my mother degrade my existence to protect a felony fraud, that tiny ember went completely, permanently cold. My internal conflict dissolved into the crisp, conditioned air. The lifelong battle between duty and self-preservation vanished. They would never love me the way they loved Cameron. They did not even view me as a human being. I was merely an obstacle to be bulldozed, an asset to be liquidated. I looked at my brother, who was smiling smugly, entirely validated by our mother's vicious attack. I looked at Brooke, who was admiring her stolen diamonds. I looked at Paul, who was impatiently tapping the gold fountain pen against the forged legal document, demanding my total submission. My thumb slid slowly over the grooved edge of the bulky black device resting hidden in my lap. On the high-definition screen, the tactical situation at the Santa Barbara property had reached a critical threshold. The blinding flame of the thermal lance had penetrated the outer layer of the structural steel. I could see the thick metal warping, melting into a glowing puddle of molten slag. The foreign operatives were moments away from accessing the classified intelligence servers. The security of the Pacific Rim was quite literally burning down, and the people responsible for lighting the match were sitting across from me, demanding my gratitude. I did not break eye contact with my father. My face remained a perfectly smooth, unreadable mask. The ambient noise of the dining room seemed to fade away, replaced by the rushing sound of my own steady pulse. I positioned my thumb directly over the raised crimson SOS button located on the side of the polymer casing. This specific button did not just send a distress signal, it authorized lethal force. It granted the Diplomatic Security Service strike teams immediate, unrestricted operational control over the target environments. Pressing it would irrevocably destroy the pristine, affluent illusion my parents had spent their entire lives constructing. I took one final grounding breath, the earthy scent of the dark roast coffee lingering in the back of my throat. I felt no hesitation, no guilt, and no lingering sorrow. There was only the cold, hard calculus of federal justice waiting to be executed. My family had actively chosen their greed over my explicit warnings. They had dug their graves, poured the concrete, and now they were handing me the shovel. I kept my eyes locked on Paul's arrogant, demanding face, ready to initiate the final, devastating sequence. My thumb lingered over the grooved crimson circle of the distress button. A fraction of an ounce of pressure was all it would take to bring the full weight of the federal government crashing through the front door. The temptation hummed in my veins, a dark, primal urge to end the charade right this second. Down in my lap, the high-definition screen showed the thermal lance burning brighter, the heavy steel of the secure room blistering under the intense heat. Time was a luxury I barely possessed, yet years of field training anchored my racing pulse. A premature strike might secure the facility, but a seasoned operative knows that a confession freely given is an airtight cage. I needed them to weave the bars of their own prison so tightly that no high-priced defense attorney could ever find a loophole. I slid my thumb a millimeter to the left, resting it on the smooth polymer casing instead of the trigger. I took a slow, measured breath, letting the stale suburban air fill my lungs. The scent of pine needles and roasted garlic suddenly felt cloying, artificial, masking the decay underneath. I looked at the post-dated indemnity agreement resting near my plate. Then I shifted my gaze back to my father. His gold fountain pen remained suspended in his hand, a conductor waiting for the final note of his symphony. Before I put my name on that document, I began keeping my tone hushed, projecting an aura of reluctant surrender. I need to understand the exact level of exposure I am inheriting. If I sign this, I am legally tethering myself to your actions. If the title company or the county recorder discovers the discrepancy, who is taking the fall? Who else knows the intricate details of this lease-to-own arrangement? Paul lowered the pen, a smug, self-satisfied grin stretching across his face. He viewed my question not as a threat, but as a genuine compliment to his strategic foresight. He adjusted his posture, puffing out his chest, eager to claim sole credit for his grand achievement. "That is the beauty of my design," Eileen Paul boasted, his voice echoing with unearned authority. "There is no exposure because there are no loose ends. I orchestrated this entire endeavor alone. I drafted the contracts, negotiated the financial terms with Derek, and established the escrow timeline. I purposely kept Cameron and Brooke insulated from the logistical mechanics. If anyone were to ever ask questions, which they will not, the paperwork traces back to me and me alone. I am the architect of this transaction. I protected the family. I am the shield." I felt a cold surge of triumph. He had just legally cemented his status as the primary mastermind of a federal crime, proudly confessing on a secure government recording. But a grand conspiracy requires accomplices, and I knew my mother's ego could never tolerate being sidelined. I turned my attention toward the other end of the table. "You did all of that alone?" I asked, lacing my words with a hint of feigned skepticism. "Bypassing the title company requires immense documentation. It requires continuous access to my private records, my property tax statements, and my bank notices. You could not have possibly managed the mail interception without raising suspicion inside the house." The bait was too rich for Diane to resist. Her eyes flashed with sudden indignation. She placed her crystal wine glass onto the table with a sharp thud, leaning forward to ensure her contribution was properly recognized. "Do not give your father all the credit," Diane interjected, her tone dripping with competitive pride. "He might have drawn up the paperwork, but I laid the foundation. For the past 10 months, I have meticulously monitored the daily deliveries. I sorted every single piece of correspondence that arrived with your name on it. I identified the tax assessments, isolated the utility bills, and secured the confidential bank letters before the housekeeper could even see them. I organized the files that allowed your father to build his convincing paper trail. We operated as a partnership." The digital recorder in my lap silently digested her words. Diane had just willfully confessed to federal mail theft, a severe felony carrying devastating penalties, especially when the intercepted parcels contained classified government correspondence. She sat there, wearing her expensive pearl necklace, radiating pride over her diligent criminality. They were a pair of suburban scavengers picking apart my life to feed their endless appetite for status. I shifted my focus to the man sitting across the roasted vegetables, the primary beneficiary of this staggering fraud. Cameron was leaning back in his chair, picking a straight piece of lint off his tailored cuff. He looked entirely unbothered by the fact that his parents had just admitted to a coordinated criminal conspiracy to fund his lifestyle. "And you are just fine with this?" I asked, staring directly into my brother's eyes. "You are comfortable launching your new company, building your supposed legacy, using stolen collateral. If this venture fails, my home is gone. Does the cost of my stability mean anything to you at all?" Cameron stopped picking at his sleeve. He met my gaze, and, for the first time in my life, I saw the unvarnished, terrifying reality of his character. There was no brotherly affection, no lingering guilt, and no moral hesitation. There was only a chilling, sociopathic calculation. "Let us be brutally honest for a moment," Leanie Cameron said, his voice smooth and devoid of empathy. "The world is divided into two distinct categories of people. There are visionaries, the ones who disrupt industries and create generational wealth. And then there are the worker bees, the people who keep the gears turning in the background. You are a worker bee. You possess a ceiling, I do not. Some people are destined to build empires, while others are destined to be stepping stones. You should feel honored that your stagnant little asset is serving a higher purpose." A heavy, suffocating silence descended upon the dining room. Even Brooke seemed momentarily stunned by the sheer, naked arrogance of his statement, though she quickly recovered, offering a supportive smile to her husband. Those words echoed in my mind, ringing with a startling clarity. Stepping stones. For 3 decades, I had quietly agonized over my place in this family. I had internalized their constant criticisms, wondering if my aloofness or my demanding career had somehow caused their indifference. I had harbored a microscopic fragment of guilt, fearing that perhaps I was the difficult daughter they always claimed I was. In a matter of seconds, Cameron's horrifying display of unbridled narcissism vaporized every lingering shred of that familial guilt. The emotional tether that bound me to these people snapped clean and painless. They were not my family. They were a collection of predators bound together by mutual delusion and an insatiable hunger for prestige. The trap was now flawlessly constructed. The audio file storing their unforced confessions was securely locked behind layers of military-grade encryption. Paul had claimed the role of the mastermind. Diane had proudly detailed her mail tampering. Cameron had provided the sociopathic motive, proving he was a willing, eager recipient of the stolen funds. They had woven an impenetrable net of guilt around themselves, providing the Department of Justice with an airtight, irrefutable case. I glanced down at the hidden screen resting in the shadows of my lab. The thermal drill had chewed through the final layer of reinforced steel. Sparks rained down on the tactical operatives. The red breach light flashed with an urgent, frantic rhythm. Time was officially up. I looked back up at the faces surrounding the pristine dining table. They sat there, glowing with victory, raising their wine glasses in a silent, shared celebration of their cleverness. They were blissfully unaware that their beautiful, curated suburban world was currently resting on a fault line, and the tectonic plates of the United States government were about to shift directly beneath their feet. My thumb pressed firmly against the grooved crimson circle. The heavy polymer device vibrated once, delivering a solid, definitive pulse against my palm to confirm the transmission. The distress signal ripped through the encrypted satellite uplink, bypassing all local jurisdictions and landing directly on the active monitoring screens of the Diplomatic Security Service Operations Center in Washington. In an instant, heavily armed tactical strike teams were mobilized across the state. A silent digital timer materialized on my high-definition display, the numbers glowing a faint tactical green. 5 minutes, 300 seconds, until my childhood home transformed into an active federal crime scene. I kept my head bowed, letting my hair fall forward to shadow my eyes. To the people sitting across the roasted vegetables and fine china, I was merely a defeated woman. Paul let out a soft, satisfied sigh. He leaned back in his custom-upholstered chair, swirling his expensive red wine with a casual flick of his wrist. He interpreted my downward gaze and sudden silence as ultimate submission. In his mind, I was seeking comfort in a text message to some distant, inconsequential friend, crying over my impending financial ruin. His smug smile stretched wider, illuminating the profound depths of his unearned arrogance. He truly believed he had broken my spirit. The dining room felt entirely detached from reality. The central air conditioning hummed a low, steady note, pumping artificial chill into the tense space. The antique grandfather clock in the hallway ticked with a rhythmic, agonizing slowness. I tracked the digital countdown hidden in my lap. 4 minutes and 40 seconds. I needed to bridge the remaining time, keeping them rooted to their chairs, bathing in their own spectacular hubris. I lifted my eyes, bypassing the golden child and the smug patriarch, focusing entirely on the woman who gave birth to me. Diane was delicately cutting a sliver of organic turkey, her posture rigid and perfectly curated for a country club luncheon. "Mom?" I asked my voice, dropping the artificial weakness I had projected earlier. "Do you feel even a fraction of remorse? You stole the only sanctuary I had ever built for myself. You took the one place where I felt safe. Does that bother you at all?" Diane paused, her silver fork hovering over the porcelain plate. She looked at me, not with maternal pity, but with a cold, calculating annoyance. She placed her cutlery down with meticulous care, wiping the corners of her mouth with a linen napkin. "Remorse is an emotion reserved for mistakes, Eileen," she stated, her tone sharp and unyielding. "I did not make a mistake. Women in our position must understand the natural flow of capital. We do not hoard stagnant resources when the men in our family have the vision to multiply them. That coastal property was doing nothing for our legacy. Family wealth belongs to the men who can actually leverage it, who can build empires and secure our status in this community. You were merely holding on to a trophy you did not know how to polish. Your brother needs that foundation far more than you need a quiet place to read your government files." 4 minutes and 10 seconds. Cameron chuckled, a rich, robust sound born of pure entitlement. He reached for the open bottle of biodynamic Cabernet, the dark liquid splashing carelessly into his crystal glass. "Hear, hear," he proclaimed, raising the rim in a mock salute toward our mother. "Mom understands the fundamental principles of economics. You cannot let sentimentality block progress, Leanie. We are operating on a higher frequency now. You all understand when the dividend checks start rolling in." He took a generous swallow of the wine, entirely blind to the catastrophic truth. That vintage Cabernet, the tailored shirt on his back, the sparkling diamonds resting on his wife's wrist, they were all funded by hostile foreign espionage. He was drinking the literal profits of international treason. The dramatic irony was thick, practically suffocating the air out of the room. They sat there, bathed in the warm glow of the chandelier, celebrating their magnificent theft. They believed they were the untouchable elites of Silicon Valley, masters of their own grand universe. They had no conception of the apocalyptic federal storm actively hurtling toward their pristine doorstep. 3 minutes and 30 seconds. I kept my hands folded in my lap, anchoring myself to the present moment. I observed the intricate details of their celebration. Brooke leaned into Cameron, whispering something that made him grin, her stolen jewelry catching the light. Paul sliced into a fresh piece of artisan bread, the crust crackling loudly in the quiet room. Every mundane action felt magnified, suspended in a bizarre, fragile stasis. I was a ghost haunting my own family dinner, waiting patiently for the exorcism to begin. 2 minutes and 50 seconds. The rhythmic ticking of the hallway clock seemed to synchronize with my own pulse. Thump, thump, thump. The air grew dense and heavy. My father wiped his mouth with a linen cloth, returning his attention to the post-dated indemnity agreement resting near my plate. "You have had enough time to process the reality of the situation," Eileen Paul declared, his voice carrying the familiar tone of a commanding officer. Pick up the pen, sign the document. We have dessert waiting in the kitchen, and I would like to conclude this unpleasant business before we serve the pie. 50 seconds. I did not move. I did not acknowledge his command. I simply stared at the digital countdown, watching the green numbers tick downward with beautiful, unrelenting precision. 45. 40. My silence irritated him deeply. Paul leaned forward, his face flushing a deep, angry shade of crimson. "Do not test my patience tonight," he warned, his voice dropping into a dangerous, gravelly register. "I have given you a master class in financial maneuvering. The least you can do is show some respect and sign your name." 30 seconds. I reached for the porcelain coffee mug resting beside the legal document. The ceramic was still warm against my palm. I wrapped my fingers around the smooth handle, lifting it to my lips. 20 seconds. I took a slow, deliberate sip. The dark roast washed over my tongue, grounding me in the immediate, visceral reality of the moment. 10 seconds. I placed the mug back onto the saucer. The soft clink echoed loudly, cutting through my father's mounting frustration. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. The digital timer vanished from the screen. For a single suspended heartbeat, the dining room remained trapped in its opulent bubble. Paul opened his mouth, ready to unleash a blistering reprimand for my defiance. Before a single syllable could escape his lips, a new sound pierced the quiet California night. It started as a faint, distant wail, carrying over the manicured lawns and towering oak trees. The high-pitched, undulating cry of multiple approaching sirens began to echo faintly through the neighborhood. The distant wail grew sharper, slicing through the manufactured tranquility of our affluent Silicon Valley suburb. Paul paused, his gold fountain pen hovering a few inches above the crisp white tablecloth. He tilted his head toward the expansive bay windows, listening as the high-pitched tone rose and fell, bouncing off the manicured lawns and imported oak trees. Probably the Henderson teenager, driving recklessly in his new sports car again, Paul muttered, waving a hand in casual dismissal. The local police have nothing better to do on a holiday than harass the wealthy residents of this neighborhood. Brooke took a nervous sip of her wine, the distant noise causing a brief ripple in her curated composure. Cameron did not even look up from his phone. My brother was already busy drafting emails to potential investors, utilizing funds that were currently being actively seized by federal authorities. Despite his outward nonchalance, a subtle tremor betrayed my father's pristine facade. His jaw clenched. The rhythmic drumming of his fingers against the mahogany table revealed a sudden, inexplicable rush of anxiety. Subconsciously, the approaching sirens triggered a primal alarm deep within his chest. He needed to secure the perimeter of his own deceit, and he needed my signature on that post-dated indemnity agreement right this second. Eileen Paul commanded, his voice tight, stripped of its previous theatrical grandeur. "We are finishing this conversation right now. Up!" He pushed his chair back, the wooden legs scraping harshly against the polished hardwood floor. Before I could process his sudden shift in demeanor, he marched around the perimeter of the dining table. He clamped his hand around my upper arm. His grip was rigid, squeezing my bicep with a forceful pressure that bordered on bruising. He hauled me upward, pulling me away from the glowing chandelier and dragging me into the adjacent, dimly lit hallway. I allowed him to maneuver me, keeping my expression perfectly neutral. I slipped the heavy encrypted satellite phone off my lap and deep into the pocket of my slacks, ensuring the microphone remained unobstructed. The narrow corridor served as a museum dedicated to his golden son. Framed photographs lined the textured wallpaper, chronicling Cameron's manufactured triumphs. Cameron holding a plastic soccer trophy. Cameron wearing a tailored graduation gown. Cameron cutting the ribbon at a failed startup venture. My history was conspicuously absent. erased from the walls just as smoothly as my name had been forged on a federal lease. Paul backed me against the oak wainscoting, standing far too close. He lowered his voice to a harsh, desperate whisper, glancing over his shoulder to ensure Diane and the others could not hear our exchange. "I am losing my patience with your stubbornness." Paul hissed his breath, warm and reeking of expensive Cabernet. "You are acting like a petulant child, throwing a tantrum over a toy she never even played with. But I am a reasonable man. I understand the art of the deal. You want to feel valued. You want a piece of the pie. Fine." He released my arm, smoothing the lapels of his cashmere sweater, attempting to project an aura of magnanimous generosity. "I will give you 20%. Paul offered, his eyes darting frantically toward the dining room entrance. 20% of the initial lease down payment. It is a generous cut, far more than you deserve for doing literally nothing. That sum will wipe out whatever pathetic consumer debts you managed to rack up in Washington. It will give you a clean slate. All you have to do is walk back into that room, pick up the gold pen, and sign the waiver." I stared at him, observing the beads of sweat forming along his hairline. He was unraveling. The brilliant mastermind was resorting to petty bribery, attempting to buy my silence with fractions of a stolen fortune. 20%, I repeated slowly, letting the words hang in the stagnant air of the corridor. "You are offering to pay me off with my own money." "I am offering you a lifeline," Paul countered, his tone turning venomous. "Take the deal, Eileen. Sign the paper, keep your mouth shut, and walk away. If you refuse, I will make sure you get nothing. I will tie that property up in endless litigation. I will drown you in legal fees until you are begging for bankruptcy. You do not have the resources to fight me. Take the cash." Down in the dark fabric of my pocket, the classified recording software continued to run, capturing every single highly illegal syllable of his felony bribery attempt. He had just offered financial compensation to a federal official in exchange for concealing a crime. He was layering offenses on top of each other, building a skyscraper of indictments with his own two hands. The wailing sirens outside grew distinctly louder. They were no longer a distant echo. The sound tore through the neighborhood, bouncing off the neighboring estates, multiplying in intensity. The local police were not responding to a speeding teenager. The federal cavalry was closing in. I looked at the man who had spent 3 decades treating me like an inconvenient afterthought. I stripped away the fragile, defeated persona I had worn all evening. I let my shoulders drop, straightening my spine until I stood eye to eye with him. The shift in my posture was subtle, but Paul noticed. He blinked, a flicker of uncertainty crossing his features. "You cannot give me 20%, Dad," I informed him, my voice soft, carrying the cold, surgical precision of a seasoned operative. "And you cannot give Cameron the rest. Do not test me." Paul sneered, though his confidence was rapidly cracking. "I already wired the funds. The money is secured in a private trust. The money does not belong to you," I stated, delivering the killing blow with effortless calm. "And it never belonged to me. That capital belongs to the United States government." Paul froze. He stared at me, his mind struggling to comprehend the arrangement of those words. He snorted a harsh, dismissive sound meant to cover his sudden dread. "What kind of insane, pathetic delusion is this?" he mocked, shaking his head in disbelief. "The United States government? Are you having a psychotic break, Eileen? Is your boring little desk job driving you mad? You are making a fool of yourself." "The house in Santa Barbara is a classified diplomatic safe house," I explained, speaking slowly, watching the color begin to drain from his face. "It is deeded through a federal blind trust. You did not forge my signature on a civilian real estate contract. You forged the signature of a State Department official on a protected national security asset. You leased a federal intelligence node to a foreign espionage ring. Liar, Paul whispered, his voice trembling. He pointed a shaking finger at my face. You are lying. You are a bitter, jealous liar trying to scare me. I am kicking you out of this house tonight. Pack your bags. You are no longer welcome in this family. I did not argue. I did not raise my voice or attempt to convince him. I simply smiled. It was not a warm smile. It was a cold, calculated, predatory expression. It was the smile of a woman watching a trap snap shut on a rat. My reaction unnerved him far more than any screaming match ever could. The utter lack of fear in my eyes shattered his fragile authority. For the first time in his entire privileged existence, Paul realized he was not the smartest person in the room. He took a physical step back, his shoulders hitting the framed photograph of Cameron's college graduation. The glass rattled sharply against the wall. At that exact second, the approaching sirens reached a deafening, terrifying crescendo directly outside the front windows. The sound was a physical force, rattling the heavy oak front door and vibrating the floorboards beneath our feet. Tires screeched against the asphalt of the circular driveway. The heavy thud of tactical boots hitting the pavement echoed through the night. Intense strobing beams of red and blue light fiercely pierced the ornate stained glass panels framing the entryway. The flashing colors flooded the dim hallway, washing over the expensive wallpaper and the curated family portraits. The harsh, unforgiving illumination painted my father's face in alternating shades of crimson and sapphire. His jaw dropped open. The arrogance, the smug superiority, the unearned confidence, it all evaporated in a single heartbeat. He stared at the flashing lights, his eyes wide, with a pure, unadulterated terror. He looked like a man who had just realized he was standing on the tracks, staring directly into the blinding headlights of an oncoming freight train. The wailing sirens abruptly died. The sudden absence of the high-pitched noise was infinitely more terrifying than the sound itself. It signaled arrival. It meant the hunt was over. Through the frosted sidelights of the ornate front door, the dark silhouettes of large, imposing figures moved with synchronized military precision. These were not local patrol officers responding to a noise complaint or checking on a false alarm. The shadows moved with lethal purpose, casting long, fractured shapes across the imported marble of the entryway. Paul took a staggering step backward. His spine hit the flocked wallpaper of the corridor. His chest heaved beneath his cashmere sweater. The artificial warmth of the house vanished, replaced by the chilling certainty of impending ruin. A deafening crack split the air. The heavy oak front door exploded inward. Splinters of expensive polished wood rained down like shrapnel on the pristine Persian rug. The reinforced brass hinges groaned in agony before giving way entirely, allowing the heavy wooden barrier to swing wildly and slam into the drywall with a thunderous crash. The impact shook the framed photographs of Cameron's manufactured triumphs off the walls, sending glass shattering onto the floorboards. The cold California night air rushed into the stifling corridor, carrying the stark, acrid scent of vehicle exhaust and tactical canvas. A flood of heavily armed agents from the Diplomatic Security Service poured over the threshold. They moved like a rising tide of dark water, dressed in unmarked black utility gear, heavy Kevlar vests, and drop-leg holsters. Their boots stomped against the pristine flooring, leaving tracks of dirt and reality across my mother's curated sanctuary. Diane shrieked from the dining room. Her high-pitched cry cut through the chaotic din. She rushed blindly into the hallway, her designer heels clicking frantically, only to stop dead in her tracks at the sight of the automatic weapons. Her hands flew to her throat, clutching her pearl necklace so tightly the strand threatened to snap. Paul, driven by decades of unchecked privilege and a desperate, foolish need to maintain control over his collapsing kingdom, puffed out his chest. He rallied the last remaining shreds of his country club authority and took a hesitant step toward the influx of federal power. "What is the meaning of this?" Paul demanded, his voice trembling slightly but laced with his trademark suburban entitlement. "Do you have any idea who I am? I know the mayor. I know the chief of police in this town. You are trespassing on private property without a warrant. I will sue every single one of you for this outrage. I will have your badges on my desk by tomorrow morning." The tactical operators did not even blink. They ignored his pathetic bluster, moving with practiced efficiency to form a secure perimeter. They locked down the exits, neutralized potential threat vectors, and flooded the space with an overwhelming show of force. The coordinated movement was silent, efficient, and utterly terrifying to a family whose biggest daily conflict was a misplaced restaurant reservation. From the center of the dark, imposing formation stepped Special Agent Marcus Cole. He was a mountain of a man, carrying an aura of absolute stoic authority that made my father look like a petulant child. His features were carved from granite, his dark eyes scanning the space with predatory calculation. He wore a tailored dark suit beneath a tactical vest bearing the gold seal of the United States State Department. Cole had run point on extraction missions in hostile territories across the globe. A shouting wealthy fraud in a Silicon Valley suburb barely registered on his threat matrix. Paul pointed a shaking manicured finger at Cole's chest. "Did you hear me? I demand you leave my house immediately. You are making a colossal mistake. You have the wrong address." Agent Cole did not look at Paul. He did not acknowledge the frantic, arrogant man screaming empty threats into the void. Instead, the imposing federal investigator let his cold, professional gaze sweep past the patriarch, bypassing Diane and locking eyes directly with me. The air in the hallway shifted. The atmospheric pressure dropped, sucking the remaining oxygen out of the space. Agent Cole stopped a few feet away, squared his broad shoulders, and offered a crisp, deeply respectful nod. Deputy Assistant Secretary Haas Cole announced, his deep, resonant voice easily overpowering the panicked murmurs of my family. "The perimeter in Santa Barbara is fully secured. The hostile foreign operatives are currently in federal custody. We received your encrypted distress signal and traced the fraudulent financial wire transfers directly to this location. Awaiting your operational directives, ma'am." The silence that followed his words was absolute, heavy and crushing. Diane gasped, covering her mouth with both hands. Her eyes widened with uncomprehending shock. Paul stared at me, his jaw working silently, unable to form a single coherent syllable. The classified title hung in the air, a heavy, undeniable truth that shattered the false, pathetic reality they had constructed for 34 years. I was not a mid-level paper pusher. I was not a bureaucratic secretary shuffling passports at a dead-end desk. I was a high-ranking federal intelligence director, wielding authority over global security operations, managing international crises, and commanding heavily armed strike teams. Behind them, Cameron and Brooke had emerged from the dining room, drawn by the chaotic commotion. My brother stood frozen in the arched doorway. He held his expensive crystal wine glass loosely in his right hand. The realization of my actual status washed over him, obliterating his sociopathic grandiosity. The woman he had just called a stepping stone was the very person orchestrating the tactical raid unfolding in his living room. The delicate crystal slipped from Cameron's numb fingers. It hit the polished hardwood floor and shattered into 1,000 glittering shards. The dark red wine splashed across the expensive wood, pooling like fresh blood at a crime scene. The sharp, jarring sound of the breaking glass broke the spell. I stepped away from the wall, leaving my trembling father behind. I straightened my spine, embodying the authority they had mocked and dismissed my entire life. I looked at Agent Cole, returning his nod with a calculated, professional precision. The time for hiding behind a fragile, defeated persona was over. I raised my hand and pointed a single, steady finger directly at Paul. "He is your primary target?" I stated, my voice echoing with cold, unforgiving finality. He forged the quitclaim deed and initiated the illegal wire transfer with hostile entities. The others are complicit accessories to the fraud and espionage. Detain them all. The power dynamic inside the Haas estate inverted permanently. The tectonic plates shifted with brutal force, crushing my parents beneath the weight of their own staggering ignorance. The people who had spent decades treating me like a secondary citizen, an inconvenient afterthought, and a mere financial resource, were suddenly reduced to their true proportions. They were incredibly small, deeply terrified, and entirely at the mercy of the terrifying professional world I secretly commanded. Two tactical agents immediately moved forward, gripping Paul by his cashmere shoulders and spinning him around to face the ruined, flocked wallpaper. The heavy metallic snap of steel handcuffs echoed loudly in the corridor, finalizing his downfall. Dad let out a wounded noise, a pitiful sound escaping his throat as his arms were wrenched behind his back. The illusion of his invincibility was gone. He looked over his shoulder at me, his eyes wide and frantic, searching for the obedient daughter he thought he had manipulated all evening. He found only a federal director watching his arrest with clinical detachment. Eileen Paul gasped, his cheek pressed forcefully against the wall. His suburban entitlement vanished, replaced by a desperate, panicked plea. "Tell them to stop, please. I am your father. I was only trying to help your brother." "You were my father," I corrected softly, watching the cold steel lock securely around his wrists. "Tonight, you are just a domestic security threat." More agents swept past us, fanning out into the dining room and kitchen to secure the remaining suspects. Cameron tried to back away, raising his hands in a weak gesture of surrender. But an agent swiftly brought him to his knees on the stained hard wood. Brooke screamed, pressing herself into the corner of the dining room, frantically trying to unhook the stolen diamond bracelet from her wrist, as if removing it would erase her complicity. Diane slumped against the banister of the grand staircase, weeping openly, as a female agent read her the Miranda rights. I stood in the center of the destruction, feeling the cool night breeze drift through the shattered doorway. The oppressive, toxic weight I had carried since childhood lifted from my shoulders, drifting away into the California night. The trap had sprung flawlessly, catching every single predator in its iron jaws. Yet even as my father was marched out the door in cuffs, a new wave of chaos was preparing to crest. The local arrests were merely the opening act. The true unraveling of the Golden Child's empire was just about to begin. Agent Cole stood tall in the ruined entryway, his broad shoulders casting a long shadow across the debris of the shattered front door. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. His tone carried the heavy, undeniable gravity of the United States justice system. He looked down at my father, whose cheek was still pressed against the flocked wallpaper, and began to recite the standard Miranda warning. But Cole did not stop at the basic rights. He detailed the exact statutes justifying the raid, ensuring every single person in the room understood the catastrophic depth of their situation. "You are being detained on suspicion of conspiracy to commit wire fraud," Cole stated, his deep voice rolling through the silent house. "Furthermore, you are facing preliminary charges for the bribery of a federal official and severe violations under the Espionage Act." The word espionage hung in the stagnant air, sharp and lethal. It was a word that did not belong in affluent Silicon Valley suburbs. It belonged in classified briefings and high-security tribunals. Hearing that specific charge was the precise moment my brother finally comprehended reality. The artificial armor of his tech CEO persona cracked and fell away in jagged pieces. Cameron was kneeling on the stained hardwood of the dining room, surrounded by tactical operators. His hands hovered awkwardly in the air. The golden child, the visionary destined to build empires, transformed into a terrified, sniveling child right before my eyes. He scrambled backward, his expensive tailored trousers sliding across the spilled red wine. He pointed a trembling, desperate finger directly at the patriarch who had spent a lifetime worshipping him. "I had nothing to do with it!" Cameron shrieked, his voice cracking into a high-pitched, hysterical whine. "I did not sign a single document. It was his brilliant idea. He forged the papers. He intercepted the mail. I just wanted seed funding for my company. I did not know he was stealing federal property. He is a liar and a thief. Arrest him, not me." The grand sacred illusion of our perfect family loyalty shattered into dust. Cameron did not hesitate to offer Paul up as a sacrificial lamb to save his own skin. He traded his father for a sliver of leniency without a second thought. Paul turned his head, straining against the steel cuffs binding his wrists. He stared at his favored son, his eyes wide with a profound, agonizing betrayal. The man had risked decades in a penitentiary to secure a financial future for his boy, only to be discarded the moment the consequences arrived. The heartbreak on my father's face was visceral, a stark realization that the unconditional love he poured into Cameron was entirely one-sided. Before Paul could formulate a defense against his own son, a sharp, pretentious classical symphony began to play from the breast pocket of his cashmere sweater. The ringtone cut through the heavy tension of the corridor. Agent Cole reached into my father's pocket, extracting the expensive, slim smartphone. The screen illuminated, displaying a caller ID in bright white letters. Derek. Agent Cole held the device up so I could see the name. I gave a subtle nod of approval. Cole tapped the green icon, activated the speakerphone function, and held the device near my father's pale face. Paul Derek screamed through the tiny speakers, his voice frantic, breathless, and laced with unhinged panic. "What did you do? What the hell did you sell me to?" Loud, chaotic noises erupted in the background of the call. I could hear the distinct sound of tactical boots stomping on wooden floorboards, the slamming of heavy doors, and the muffled shouts of federal operators securing the Santa Barbara perimeter. Paul swallowed hard, his throat clicking in the silence of our ruined hallway. "Derek," he stammered, sweat pooling along his brow. "Derek, what is happening over there?" They came through the windows. Derek sobbed the sound of a grown man, breaking under immense terror, echoing through the phone. "Federal tactical teams just swarmed the entire property. They seized my thermal drills. They detained my entire contracting crew. You told me this property was an off-the-grid civilian asset. You told me there would be no government oversight. I did not know," Paul pleaded, his voice weak and trembling. "I thought it was just a regular house." "A regular house does not have lead-lined Faraday cages behind the drywall," Derek shrieked his panic, escalating into pure hysteria. "My international handlers are going to murder me. Do you understand that, Paul? I am a dead man. The foreign operatives funding my accounts will eliminate me for exposing this network to the State Department. You ruined everything. They're putting cuffs on thee right now. They know who I am." The line went dead with a sharp click. The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush bone. The terrifying plot twist was now fully revealed, laid bare under the harsh glow of the tactical flashlights sweeping across the lawn outside. Paul had believed he was swindling a rich technology investor. He now understood he had functioned as a useful idiot for a foreign espionage ring. He was an accessory to international treason. The overlapping layers of apocalyptic consequence began to suffocate him. The color drained entirely from his face, leaving his skin a sickly ashen gray. His knees buckled, and he would have collapsed onto the floor if the two federal agents were not holding him upright against the wall. In the corner of the dining room, Brooke absorbed this new, devastating information. She stood pressed against the floral wallpaper, her eyes darting between the armed agents, her weeping husband, and her ruined father-in-law. Her internal calculations executed with ruthless speed. Brooke was a creature of comfort status and convenience. She had married a prospective tech billionaire, not a broke, soon-to-be indicted felon facing federal treason charges. She looked down at her wrist. The heavy diamond tennis bracelet suddenly looked less like a status symbol and more like a glowing beacon of criminal complicity. With frantic, trembling fingers, Brooke unclasped the jewelry. She threw the sparkling diamonds onto the floor. The heavy stones clattered loudly against the hard wood, coming to rest near a puddle of spilled wine. She turned her gaze toward Cameron, who was still kneeling on the ground, sobbing into his hands. Any trace of the supportive, loving wife vanished, replaced by a cold, predatory survival instinct. "Do not look at me," Brooke snarled, her voice dripping with sheer disgust. "I am not going down for your pathetic family's treason. You told me you were securing legitimate venture capital. You told me we were going to be the elite of Silicon Valley. You dragged me into an international espionage ring because you are too lazy to build a real company." "Brooke, please," Cameron begged, reaching a trembling hand toward her. "We can hire lawyers. We can fight this." "With what money?" Brooke screamed, stepping back to avoid his touch as if he were diseased. "The government is going to freeze every single account you possess. You are broke. You are a fraud. I am calling a divorce attorney the second they let me touch my phone. I am severing every legal tie I have to you. I am done." She turned her vicious fury toward my mother, who was sitting slumped on the bottom step of the grand staircase, weeping into her hands. "And you," Brooke spat, pointing a manicured nail at Diane. "You sat there all evening, praising this disaster. You enabled this entire criminal circus. You deserve to rot in a cell for dragging me into this nightmare." Diane lifted her tear-streaked face, her curated country club composure entirely destroyed. She glared at her daughter-in-law, her sorrow hardening into desperate anger. "You greedy little parasite," Diane fired back, her voice raspy and broken. "You gladly spent the money the moment it hit the account. You were cheering for this fraud an hour ago. Do not pretend you possess a moral compass now." Cameron spun around on his knees, shouting at his mother to stop insulting his soon-to-be ex-wife. Paul yelled over his shoulder, cursing Cameron for his cowardly betrayal. Brooke screamed at all of them, demanding the federal agents allow her to leave the premises immediately. The Haas family rapidly descended into a vicious, unforgiving circular firing squad. They tore at each other with ruthless precision, exposing decades of hidden resentments, superficial loyalties, and unbridled narcissism. The grand, unified front they had projected for my entire life burned to ash in a matter of seconds. I stood near the shattered doorway, watching the people who shared my blood destroy one another. The cool night breeze rustled the leaves of the oak trees outside. I felt a profound, settling peace deep within my chest. I did not need to raise my voice. I did not need to hurl insults or demand apologies. The federal trap had snapped completely shut, and the predators caught inside were doing the work of destroying each other for me. Agent Cole raised 2 fingers to his earpiece, tuning out the pathetic sobbing echoing through the dining room. He issued a crisp, rapid directive to the local field office. His voice remained a steady baritone, unaffected by the domestic collapse happening at his boots. He transmitted the residential address and country club affiliation for a man named Mitchell, the greedy notary who had stamped the fraudulent lease. Cole ordered a heavily armed tactical unit to intercept Mitchell immediately, citing conspiracy to commit espionage and federal forgery. Paul sagged against the steel cuffs. His knees buckled, forcing the 2 operators flanking him to haul him upward by his cashmere lapels. The patriarch realized the profound, inescapable reach of his actions. He had not just ruined his own life. He had doomed his golfing partner, his associates, and anyone else who touched that poisoned paperwork. The insulating bubble of affluent suburbia had burst, exposing them all to the harsh, unforgiving machinery of the Justice Department. While Cole coordinated the secondary arrests, a specialized evidence retrieval team flooded the staircase. They marched past Diane in a tight, disciplined formation, carrying heavy plastic bins, crowbars, and tactical flashlights. Their destination was the second floor, specifically the master study. This was Paul's sacred sanctuary, a room filled with leather-bound books he never read, expensive cigars he only smoked for show, and the sprawling mahogany desk where he pretended to be a titan of industry. Within seconds, the sounds of systematic structural dismantling drifted down from the upper level. Heavy drawers were yanked from their tracks and dumped unceremoniously onto the floor. The distinct tearing crunch of drywall echoed through the corridor as technicians began punching holes in the pristine walls to search for hidden wall safes or concealed foreign surveillance devices. The physical destruction of their beautiful, curated home mirrored the total collapse of their toxic family unit. Every pristine surface, every carefully chosen piece of decor was subjected to ruthless federal scrutiny. The agents ripped up the corners of expensive Persian rugs. They sliced open the backing of custom velvet armchairs. The house was being gutted from the inside out, exposing the rotting foundation beneath the fresh coat of high-gloss paint. A female operative descended the staircase a few minutes later, her heavy boots crunching over the shattered glass in the foyer. She carried a thick, transparent evidence bag stuffed with disorganized paperwork, manila folders, and loose envelopes. She handed the heavy plastic bundle directly to Agent Cole, pointing to a specific stack of documents near the top. Cole inspected the haul, his jaw tightening into a grim line. He turned his imposing frame toward my father, holding the transparent bag up to the harsh, tactical lighting. "This is not a single lapse in judgment," Cole stated, his voice ringing with chilling authority. "We found a dedicated filing cabinet hidden behind a false panel in your closet. You possess 10 months of intercepted correspondence, bank statements, property tax assessments, and classified State Department logistics packets." Cole pulled a small notebook from the pile, flipping it open to reveal pages filled with blue ink. He turned the notebook so the entire room could see the contents. "You filled an entire ledger practicing her signature," Cole noted, his tone dripping with profound disgust. "You spent hours perfecting the loop of her handwriting, testing different pens, studying the exact pressure of her keystrokes. You orchestrated a calculated, long-term campaign to erase your own daughter's identity." The revelation hit the room like a physical shockwave. This was not a crime of sudden opportunity. Paul had not acted on a fleeting impulse to help his struggling son. He had plotted this theft for nearly a year, smiling at me during holidays, asking about my career, all while secretly treating my life as a bank account he was slowly picking the lock on. As the undeniable depth of the deceit came to light, the tense silence shattered. Brooke pushed herself off the floral wallpaper, her face twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated venom. The reality of her impending financial ruin struck her with the force of a runaway train. She stared at the evidence bag, realizing that the government possessed an airtight, irrefutable paper trail. There would be no clever legal defense. There would be no high-priced plea deal. The asset forfeiture would be swift and devastating. She turned her furious gaze toward Cameron, who was still kneeling in the puddle of spilled Cabernet, staring blankly at the floor. "You pathetic, useless fraud!" Brooke screamed, her voice echoing shrilly over the sounds of tearing drywall upstairs. "You told me your father was a genius. You told me this seed funding was a legitimate venture capital miracle. You are nothing but a lazy parasite living off stolen government property." Brooke stopped Cameron, pleaded weakly, raising a trembling hand to shield his face from her verbal assault. We did not know the house was federal. We thought we were just leveraging a stagnant asset.
Ignorance does not stop a federal indictment, Brooke shrieked, taking a menacing step toward him. I am calling my father the second I leave this house. I am hiring the most vicious divorce attorneys in the state. I am going to strip you of whatever microscopic dignity you have left. I will testify against you. I will hand them every password, every bank routing number, and every single text message you ever sent me. You are going to rot in a federal cell, and I am going to make sure the judge knows exactly how eager you were to spend your sister's money.
Diane pushed herself off the stairs, her sorrow hardening into a desperate feral rage. She pointed a shaking finger at her daughter-in-law, her curated composure entirely gone. "You treacherous little snake!" Diane spat, tears ruining her expensive makeup. "You are just as guilty as the rest of us. You wore those diamonds tonight. You drank the wine. You celebrated the theft. You do not get to play the innocent victim now." "I am not playing the victim," Brooke fired back, her eyes wide and manic. "I am playing the survivor, something none of you trust fund idiots know how to do." Paul twisted against his handcuffs, shouting over the chaos. He blamed Diane for failing to hide the intercepted mail properly. Diane screamed right back, accusing Paul of being a sloppy, arrogant fool who ruined their golden years. Cameron sobbed, blaming both of his parents for creating a toxic environment that pressured him into needing a legal capital. The Haas family devolved into a pathetic, screaming, circular firing squad. They viciously attacked one another, desperately trying to mitigate their own overwhelming guilt by tearing their loved ones to shreds. The loyalty they had always demanded from me, the familial duty they had weaponized to keep me in line, it was all revealed as a fragile, transactional lie. They possessed no honor. They shared no bond deeper than their mutual greed. I turned my back on the hysterical screaming. I navigated through the chaotic living room, moving like a ghost through the wreckage of my own history. Federal agents stepped aside to let me pass, offering crisp nods of respect. I walked down the dim hallway and entered the sterile guest room. The noise from the foyer felt distant and muted inside the quiet sanctuary. I approached the bed and unzipped my canvas duffel bag. With calm, calculated precision, I began to pack. I folded my blouses along the exact creases, aligning the edges perfectly. I retrieved my toiletries from the bathroom, wiping the condensation off the mirror. I did not rush. I allowed the rhythmic, methodical motions to soothe my racing pulse. Every single choice Paul made to elevate his golden son had systematically backfired. He tried to steal a house, and in return, he forfeited his freedom. He tried to buy Cameron an empire, and instead, he bought him a prison sentence. He tried to silence me, and he inadvertently handed me the very sword used to sever their legacy. They were left utterly defenseless, trapped in a cage of their own making. I tucked the heavy, encrypted satellite phone securely into the side pocket of my bag, sliding the brass zipper shut with a definitive final click. I slung the heavy canvas strap over my shoulder and walked back out into the corridor. The destruction was nearly complete. Drywall dust hung in the air like a fine mist coating the expensive hardwood floors in a layer of pale chalk. Agents were marching down the stairs carrying hard drives, laptops, and locked briefcases seized from the study. The screaming in the foyer had devolved into exhausted, breathless sobbing. I bypassed the chaotic knot of bodies and stood quietly by the shattered front door. The cool night wind brushed against my face, carrying the scent of salt and eucalyptus from the distant bay. I leaned against the broken door frame, completely detached from the hysterical sobbing echoing loudly behind me. I watched the tactical red and blue lights paint the suburban street, a silent spectator to the ruin of a kingdom that never truly belonged to me. The cacophony of blame bouncing off the ruined walls reached a fever pitch before Agent Cole decided he had heard enough. He did not shout to regain control.
He simply unclipped a heavy encrypted tablet from his tactical vest and tapped the screen. The sharp synthetic chime of the device sliced through the weeping. "Listen carefully," Cole instructed, his voice a low rumble that commanded absolute silence. The circular firing squad ceased immediately. Paul, Diane Cameron, and Brooke turned their terrified eyes toward the imposing federal investigator. Sensing that the nightmare was about to plunge into an even darker abyss, Cole read directly from the glowing screen, his tone surgical and devoid of any human sympathy. Because the fraudulent lease involved a federally protected intelligence node, and because the capital you received originated from flagged offshore accounts, this investigation transcends standard domestic fraud. The money Derek transferred into your possession was classified as hostile foreign capital. You willingly accepted it. You wired it directly across state lines into multiple personal accounts. Cole looked down at my father, his dark eyes locking on to the broken man. Therefore, under the provisions of the USA Patriot Act and severe federal security statutes, I am authorizing immediate and sweeping asset forfeiture. Paul blinked slowly. His brain, clouded by decades of unchecked privilege, struggled to process the dense legal terminology. "Asset forfeiture," he whispered the words, scraping painfully against his dry throat. "What does that mean?" "It means the United States government now owns everything you possess," Cole clarified, his voice ringing with chilling authority. 30 seconds ago, the Department of Justice executed a blanket freeze on your entire financial portfolio. The checking accounts are gone, the savings are gone, your personal retirement funds have been seized, Diane's mutual funds are locked, the equity in this pristine Silicon Valley home is now government property. Every single penny tied to your Social Security numbers is officially confiscated, pending a massive, years-long espionage investigation. A heavy, suffocating silence blanketed the corridor. The reality of their new existence crashed down upon them with the force of a falling anvil. They were left with absolutely $0 to their names. Cameron let out a strangled gasp, pulling at his tailored shirt as if he suddenly could not breathe. "But my company," he pleaded, crawling forward a few inches across the wine-stained wood. "The startup capital. You cannot take the business accounts. We have payroll tomorrow. We have vendors. We are launching a beta test." Cole looked down at my brother with undisguised contempt. "Your company was capitalized entirely by foreign espionage funds. It is a criminal enterprise. The corporate accounts are locked. Your assets are zero. You own nothing." Brooke let out a piercing, unhinged shriek. The realization struck her with brutal force. Her exit strategy was completely compromised. She had planned to divorce a wealthy man and take half his fortune. Now she was legally tethered to a penniless traitor. She lunged toward Cameron, her manicured hands curling into vicious claws. "You ruined me!" she screamed, thrashing wildly against the tactical operator, who stepped in to restrain her. "My car is in your name. My credit cards are linked to those seized accounts. I have nothing. I cannot even afford to hire a lawyer to get away from you. You trapped me in this nightmare." Paul slid down the flocked wallpaper, his legs completely giving out. The two agents supporting him allowed him to slump onto the floor. His expensive cashmere sweater caught on the jagged splinters of the ruined doorframe, tearing the fine fabric. The sheer scale of this poetic justice was genuinely breathtaking. For his entire adult life, my father had measured his worth and the worth of everyone around him by the size of their bank accounts. He worshipped liquid capital. He treated me like a worthless, stagnant liability because I chose public service over private wealth. He risked everything to illegally enrich his favored son, desperate to cement a legacy of elite Silicon Valley dominance. Now that identical arrogance had triggered the total financial annihilation of his entire bloodline. He was not just broke. He was buried under a mountain of federal debt and restitution he could never possibly repay in 10 lifetimes.
Paul stared at his manacled hands resting in his lap. His chest stopped heaving. His frantic, desperate energy evaporated entirely, replaced by a hollow, vacant, profoundly traumatized stare. The reality of his absolute destruction finally broke his mind. The brilliant patriarch was nothing more than a ruined old man sitting in the ashes of his own burning kingdom, realizing he was the one who struck the match. Across the foyer, Cameron wept openly. The golden child curled into a tight fetal position on the stained hardwood, sobbing with loud, ugly, heaving gasps that echoed terribly in the quiet house. His cushy, lazy lifestyle was permanently erased. There would be no more biodynamic wine, no more catered investor dinners, no more pretending to be a visionary genius disrupting the tech industry. He was a 36-year-old man with a fake resume, a furious spouse, and a looming maximum security prison sentence. The thick armor of his unearned privilege was stripped away piece by piece, leaving a pathetic, helpless coward weeping on the floor. I watched them both from the shattered doorway. I felt no pity. I felt no lingering sorrow. I felt only an immense, settling peace. The universe had course-corrected, delivering a brutal, flawless karmic balance. To punctuate the absolute finality of their ruin, a new wave of federal technicians marched through the broken front door. They wore heavy canvas coveralls and carried sledgehammers, digital frequency scanners, and thermal imaging cameras. Agent Cole issued a silent, sharp hand signal. The technicians immediately approached the pristine, custom-painted walls of the grand living room. With brutal, synchronized force, two technicians swung their heavy steel hammers into the drywall. The impact was deafening. Thick chunks of plaster exploded outward, raining white dust over the expensive velvet furniture and the curated art pieces. "We are sweeping the premises for hidden foreign surveillance devices," Cole announced, over the chaotic sounds of the destruction. "Since you granted hostile operatives access to your financial network, we must assume this entire residential structure is compromised. We will not leave until every inch of this house has been inspected." The technicians tore into the walls with relentless aggression. They ripped away the pink fiberglass insulation, severed electrical wires, and left massive, jagged holes in the flawless architecture. The physical destruction of the house perfectly mirrored the internal destruction of the family. The beautiful, toxic household was being physically ripped apart, exposing the hollow, rotting framework hidden beneath the expensive veneer. The ruin was finally rendered undeniable and completely permanent. I stood quietly by the door, my canvas bag resting comfortably against my hip. The chalky dust drifted through the air, settling like fresh snow on Paul's slumped shoulders and Cameron's weeping form. The house looked like an active war zone. The life they had known was officially, irreversibly over. There was no clever legal loophole to exploit. There was no wealthy country club friend to call for a quick bailout. There was no backdoor deal left to negotiate. The immense, crushing weight of the federal government had ground them into dust. Yet even as the walls literally crashed down around them in violent showers of plaster, the deepest layers of their suburban delusion refused to die completely, setting the stage for one final, desperate, pathetic display of entitlement. The heavy steel sledges continued their rhythmic, punishing assault on the living room architecture. White plaster dust drifted through the corridor like toxic snow, settling on the shoulders of the federal tactical operators and the ruined cashmere of my father's tailored sweater. The realization that there was no hidden back door, no powerful country club attorney who could untangle this mess, finally pierced the dense fog of their Silicon Valley delusion. The invisible fortress of wealth and privilege they had hidden behind for decades had just been vaporized by a single encrypted distress signal. My mother was the first to physically break. The woman who had spent her entire adult life cultivating an image of impenetrable suburban royalty dissolved into guttural, ugly sobs. Diane slipped off the bottom stair, her designer skirt catching and tearing on a jagged piece of wood protruding from the ruined banister. She dropped heavily to her knees, right onto the shattered crystal and porcelain scattered across the dining room threshold. Sharp, glittering fragments bit deep into her skin, but she did not seem to register the pain or the dark blood welling beneath her sheer tights. She crawled toward me, her manicured hands leaving small crimson smears on the expensive hardwood floorboards. "Eileen, please," Diane wailed, reaching a trembling, desperate hand toward the hem of my slacks. "You have to stop this. Tell them to halt the search. You have the power to make this go away. We are your family. I carried you in my womb. I gave you life. You cannot let them destroy our home." Paul joined her, fighting weakly against the towering operators holding his arms. He dragged his expensive leather dress shoes across the debris, forcing the agents to let him stumble forward until he was kneeling in the dust beside his weeping wife. "Use your clearance," Eileen Paul begged, his voice reduced to a hoarse, pathetic rasp. "Call your superiors in Washington. Explain that it was a simple misunderstanding. Tell them it was a civilian real estate mix-up. You know the people in charge. You can fix this. Before it goes on the public record, you cannot let them send your own parents to a federal penitentiary. We gave you everything. We clothed you, we fed you, we put you through university. You owe us your protection." They shamelessly weaponized a biological bond that had only ever existed in tax brackets and holiday photo ops. My childhood was never a nurturing environment. It was a carefully managed ledger where every warm meal and textbook was recorded as a debt I was expected to repay in blind obedience. They loved the concept of a successful daughter they could brag about at dinner parties, but they only ever truly loved Cameron. They fed me obligations and called it affection. Now, facing decades behind bars, they wanted to cash in on a maternal debt they had never actually earned. I took a slow, deliberate step backward, moving just far enough that Diane's bloody fingers grasped nothing but empty air. I looked down at the two pathetic figures kneeling in the chaotic wreckage of their own making. "A simple misunderstanding," I repeated, my voice dropping into a quiet surgical register that sliced effortlessly through the loud crashing noises of the tearing drywall. "You deliberately bypassed a federal title transfer. You employed a corrupt notary to circumvent the law. You leased an active intelligence node to hostile foreign spies. There is no misunderstanding here. There is only treason." I crouched down, bringing my face level with my father's terrified, bloodshot eyes. I wanted him to see the unwavering certainty in my gaze. "Do you remember the conversation we had at that dining table less than an hour ago?" I asked, my tone eerily calm and meticulously measured. "You proudly declared that you acted entirely alone. You boasted about orchestrating the fraud to insulate your golden son. You took full ownership of the sale." Paul flinched, his shoulders curling inward as the memory of his own recorded confession struck him like a physical blow. He opened his mouth to offer some pathetic excuse, but the words died in his dry throat. I turned my chilling gaze toward my mother. Diane was trembling violently, her tears cutting tracks through the white plaster dust coating her cheeks. "And you?" I said, maintaining that flat, unyielding authority. "You called me a jealous failure. You mocked my demanding career as a bureaucratic dead end. You said I was a bitter, lonely woman sitting on a stagnant asset trying to ruin my brother's magnificent success. You demanded I sign away my legal rights because family wealth inherently belongs to the men who can multiply it." Diane shook her head frantically, fresh tears spilling over her eyelashes. "I was angry," she sobbed, pressing her bleeding hands against her chest. "I did not mean those things, sweetheart. I was just trying to protect Cameron." "You meant every single syllable," I corrected softly.
You spent 34 years treating me like an inconvenient stepping stone. You degraded my existence to fuel his ego. And now you want me to leverage my high-level security clearance to bail you out of a federal indictment. I stood back up to my full height, towering over the people who had spent a lifetime trying to make me feel small. My oath exists to protect this great nation from genuine threats, I stated, my words ringing with absolute, unshakable conviction. It exists to safeguard Allied operatives and secure international stability. My clearance is not a magic wand designed to rescue treasonous thieves from the devastating consequences of their own staggering greed. I will not lift a single finger to help you. I stood in the center of the ruined hallway and waited for the familiar, ingrained daughterly instinct to kick in. I waited for the dull sting of guilt, the urge to comfort my weeping parents, or the sorrow that usually accompanies the destruction of a family. I searched the deepest corners of my chest for a single shred of empathy. There was nothing. The emotional cavity where my familial loyalty used to reside was entirely empty, replaced by a cold, immaculate, enduring peace. The psychological tether had snapped permanently. I looked at the weeping, bleeding people who had raised me, and I felt clinical detachment. They were no longer my mother and father. They were simply targets apprehended during a successful counterintelligence operation. The emotional severing was total, leaving a profound sense of vindication settling over my soul. Agent Cole, recognizing that my interrogation had reached its definitive conclusion, stepped forward from the shadows. His face remained carved from stone. He gripped Paul by the collar of his ruined sweater, hauling the disgraced patriarch forcefully upward. "It is time to go," Cole rumbled, his grip unbreakable. "No, wait! Eileen, please!" Paul screamed, thrashing wildly against the federal investigator. His expensive leather shoes dragged uselessly against the floorboards as he was marched toward the shattered front entrance. "Do not let them do this! I am your father! Help me!" His desperate cries faded into the cold California night as Cole shoved him through the broken doorframe and out toward the waiting fleet of armored transport vehicles. Diane watched her husband disappear into the darkness. The finality of the moment broke her central nervous system. She collapsed fully onto the glass-covered hardwood, her chest heaving with rapid, shallow gasps. She was hyperventilating, her manicured hands clutching her pearl necklace as blind panic starved her lungs of oxygen. A female tactical medic immediately knelt beside her, administering standard emergency protocols with cold professional efficiency, treating my mother like a hostile prisoner suffering a medical event rather than a distressed suburban housewife. I turned my back on the pathetic spectacle unfolding on the floor. I walked calmly toward the intact section of the wooden banister. I reached for the warm, woolen coat I had draped there hours earlier. I slid my arm smoothly into the thick sleeves, adjusting the heavy collar against the chill drafting in from the ruined entryway. I stood in the devastated foyer, adjusting my canvas duffel bag on my shoulder. I was entirely unburdened by guilt, regret, or sorrow. I watched with quiet satisfaction as my childhood home completed its violent transformation into an active, chaotic federal crime scene, knowing I would never have to step foot inside this toxic cage ever again. Exactly 6 months have passed since the flashing tactical lights painted the pristine columns of my childhood home. The calendar pages turned, replacing the bitter, chaotic chill of a ruined Christmas Eve with the bright, enduring warmth of a California summer. I sit peacefully on the reinforced composite decking of my fully restored Santa Barbara sanctuary, looking out over the endless, sparkling expanse of the Pacific Ocean. The morning sun warms my face, coaxing a gentle breeze off the salt water that carries the crisp, clean scent of eucalyptus and ocean brine. I hold a porcelain mug in my hands, feeling the soothing heat transfer into my palms. The dark roast coffee is rich, earthy, and perfectly grounding. I take a slow, deliberate sip. I unfold the morning newspaper across my lap.
The dry rustle of the thick pages provides a comforting analog soundtrack to the profound, unbroken quiet of my environment. The physical damage inflicted upon my property was thoroughly eradicated months ago. Federal defense contractors replaced the breached outer drywall with thicker, stronger titanium-reinforced shielding. The lead-lined Faraday cage hums silently behind the fresh coats of coastal blue paint, processing classified diplomatic cables with flawless, uninterrupted efficiency. The hostile espionage ring that attempted to pierce this fortress no longer exists in any operational capacity. Department of Justice operatives dismantled the foreign corporate syndicate within a matter of weeks following the holiday raid. The threat evaporated into classified briefing folders, leaving behind a pristine, impenetrable coastal fortress. The legal machinery of the United States government operates with a slow, grinding, merciless precision. It does not care about country club memberships, luxury vehicles, or the curated illusions of suburban royalty. The federal indictments fell upon my parents like a collapsed roof, pinning them beneath a staggering weight of undeniable evidence. There were no high-priced defense attorneys capable of untangling the recorded confessions I handed to Agent Cole. Paul and Diane faced an insurmountable mountain of audio surveillance, intercepted mail, and witness testimonies. The bribery charge alone secured their inevitable doom. Facing the terrifying prospect of a lengthy, highly publicized trial that would broadcast their treason to every social circle in California, they capitulated. Last Tuesday, Paul and Diane stood essentially before a stern federal judge in a stark, heavily guarded downtown Los Angeles courtroom. The affluent glow of their previous lives was entirely gone. They wore identical institutional gray jumpsuits, their wrists shackled to thick waist chains. Paul had lost his expensive tan and his unearned swagger. Diane looked frail, her hair stripped of its salon color, her posture slumped under the harsh fluorescent lighting. They officially entered guilty pleas for federal wire fraud, bribery of a government official, and gross negligence regarding classified intelligence assets. The judge showed zero leniency, dismissing their pathetic pleas for house arrest. They are currently awaiting transfer to separate high-security federal penitentiaries, where they will spend a significant portion of their remaining golden years staring at concrete walls instead of ocean views. The financial devastation proved even more thorough than the criminal convictions. Sweeping asset forfeiture stripped their Silicon Valley estate down to the wooden studs, funneling the proceeds directly into federal restitution funds. However, the true architect of their inescapable monetary ruin was the very man they tried to swindle. Derek, despite facing his own severe espionage charges, retained ruthless legal counsel from his federal holding cell. He initiated a vicious, highly targeted civil lawsuit against my father's ruined estate, citing fraudulent inducement and breach of contract. The civil litigation succeeded brilliantly, burying my parents under towering mountains of inescapable debt. They possess zero equity, zero savings, and a negative net worth so staggering it defies basic mathematical comprehension. The most exquisite poetic justice, however, belonged exclusively to the Golden Child. Cameron's grand illusion of Silicon Valley dominance shattered overnight, leaving behind a pathetic, unskilled man incapable of surviving in the real world. The swift, ruthless divorce finalized by Brooke stripped him of any remaining dignity. She leveraged the criminal investigation to secure total legal immunity for herself, cooperating fully with federal prosecutors. She handed over every password, every text message, and every incriminating financial document, legally severing all ties and leaving my brother twisting in the unforgiving wind. She changed her last name, relocated to another state, and erased Cameron from her existence as easily as wiping a smudge off a mirror. Cameron avoided federal prison time only by agreeing to a brutal, humiliating plea deal. The prosecution mandated thousands of hours of intense federal community service, coupled with a crushing lifelong financial restitution order. The former tech CEO, the visionary who once sat at a crystal-adorned dining table and claimed he was destined to build empires while others served as mere stepping stones, now punches a physical time clock. The court assigned him to a hazardous materials remediation crew. 5 days a week, Cameron is forced to wear a thick, suffocating, bright yellow hazmat suit. He scrubs toxic chemical residue from abandoned government testing sites out in the unforgiving, scorching heat of the Mojave Desert. The man who once threw a hysterical, childish tantrum because a private chef sliced his organic holiday steak against the grain now eats stale bologna sandwiches while sitting on overturned plastic chemical buckets. He earns the state minimum wage for his grueling labor. Every single paycheck is automatically garnished by the federal government to satisfy his staggering financial penalties, leaving him barely enough money to rent a miserable room in a dilapidated boarding house. His soft, manicured hands are now calloused, blistered, and permanently stained with industrial solvents. The luxury sports car was seized and replaced by a crowded, unair-conditioned public transit bus. I turn the page of the newspaper, the crisp paper smoothing flat beneath my palm. The complex layers of consequence have finally settled into a permanent, unyielding reality. The antagonists of my life were crushed by the inescapable weight of their own arrogant actions. They built a fragile house of cards, fueled by unchecked entitlement, and they handed me the fan. My demanding career at the State Department continues to thrive, unimpeded by the frantic, draining demands of my former relatives. The successful neutralization of the espionage threat earned me a discreet, highly classified commendation from the Secretary of State. My logistical operations across the Pacific Rim run with unparalleled smoothness. I sleep deeply through the night, untroubled by the passive-aggressive phone calls that used to plague my weekends. The toxic, parasitic drain on my emotional and financial resources was severed with surgical precision, leaving me energized, focused, and free. I look out at the crashing waves, watching the white crests break rhythmically against the rocky shoreline below my deck. For 3 decades, I believed that enduring their abuse was the mandatory price of admission into a family. I thought enduring the subtle insults, the blatant favoritism, and the relentless financial demands proved my loyalty. I was conditioned to believe that blood dictated duty, even when that blood turned poisonous. The cool salt spray touches my cheeks, refreshing and vital. I take another sip of the dark roast coffee. The bitter, earthy flavor grounds me in the beautiful present moment, serving as a stark contrast to the sterile, artificial perfection of the Silicon Valley estate I left behind. My sanctuary is secure. My identity is protected. The quiet hum of the ocean represents a profound, enduring victory. The stage is set. The predators are caged, and the lingering echoes of their manufactured drama have faded into total silence. I am the sole author of my future, and the horizon stretching out before me is clear, bright, and boundless. The California sun begins its slow, majestic descent toward the western horizon, casting long ribbons of gold and amber across the endless surface of the Pacific Ocean. I remain seated on the reinforced composite decking of my coastal sanctuary. The morning newspaper rests, neatly folded, on the glass patio table next to my empty porcelain coffee mug. The air cools as the afternoon wanes, carrying the crisp scent of salt spray and blooming jasmine from the terraced garden below. A flock of brown pelicans glides silently over the breaking waves, tracing the natural curvature of the shoreline. The profound quiet of the estate wraps around me like a heavy, protective blanket. I lean back into the deep cushions of the patio chair, allowing the fading daylight to warm my skin. My breathing is slow, steady, and unburdened. The geopolitical crisis that threatened to breach these walls is a closed chapter, filed away in the secure archives of the State Department. My mind is clear, focused on the upcoming diplomatic summits scheduled for the following quarter. The tranquil silence shatters. A sharp, distinct electronic trill echoes from the heavy polymer satellite phone resting on the table. It is not the rapid, pulsating alert of a perimeter breach. It is the sterile, monotonous ringtone assigned exclusively to external communications. I turn my head, studying the dark screen. The device vibrates against the glass surface, projecting a demanding, persistent rhythm. My first instinct is to ignore the intrusion. Very few individuals possess the routing number for this specific encrypted line. I reach out my fingers, brushing the cool matte casing. I lift the device, tapping the biometric sensor to illuminate the display. An unknown 10-digit number flashes in stark white text across the screen, accompanied by an origin tag identifying a high-security federal holding facility located deep in the Nevada desert. I stare at the origin tag. The location houses inmates awaiting final transfer to permanent penitentiary assignments. I swipe the green icon to open the channel. Before a human voice can speak, an automated robotic operator chimes through the high-fidelity speaker. This is a prepaid collect call from an inmate at a federal correctional institution, the synthetic voice announces, stripping away any lingering shreds of human dignity. To accept the charges, press 1. To decline and block this number, press 2. I hold the heavy device near my ear. The evening breeze rustles the leaves of the coastal oaks behind me. I press the number 1 on the digital keypad. A series of metallic clicks and harsh static fills the line. The sound of calls being routed through layers of federal monitoring and security filters. Eileen, a ragged, frantic voice gasps through the static. "Are you there? Pick up the phone. You have to listen to me." It is Diane. The curated, elitist modulation she spent decades perfecting at country club luncheons is gone. Her voice is raw trembling with a frantic, desperate exhaustion. The background noise filtering through the connection paints a grim picture of her new reality. I hear the echoing clang of heavy steel doors sliding on reinforced tracks. I hear the dull ambient roar of hundreds of inmates confined within a concrete cavern. There are no string quartets, no clinking crystal wine glasses, and no polite suburban gossip. There is only the stark, unforgiving reality of the United States penal system. "I am here," I reply softly, keeping my tone perfectly neutral, devoid of any daughterly warmth or sudden pity. "Oh, thank God," Diane breathes, her words tumbling out in a rushed, frantic stream. "You have to do something, Eileen. You have to get me out of this specific unit. The conditions here are barbaric. The air conditioning is broken, and the concrete walls radiate heat all night. They force us to wear these stiff, scratchy canvas uniforms that chafe my skin. The food is inedible. They served us some kind of processed meat paste for dinner, and the water tastes like copper. I cannot sleep. The women in the neighboring cells yell constantly. I asked the warden to transfer me to a minimum security white-collar facility, but he laughed at me. He actually laughed in my face. You need to call your superiors. You need to pull some strings and get me moved to a place with proper amenities. This is a gross violation of my civil rights." I listen to her frantic list of grievances. She faces a decade behind bars for participating in a treasonous espionage conspiracy, yet her primary concern is the texture of her state-issued clothing and the quality of the cafeteria food. The loss of her freedom barely registers compared to the loss of her physical comforts. The prison environment has not humbled her in the slightest. It has merely inconvenienced her. She still views herself as a victim of circumstance, entirely blind to the catastrophic choices that placed her inside that concrete cell. She clings desperately to the old, toxic conditioning, assuming I will automatically revert to my assigned role as the invisible, responsible fixer. "And my commissary account is empty," Diane continues, her tone shifting from complaints to direct demands. "Your father cannot send me anything because his assets are frozen. Cameron is entirely useless, scrubbing dirt in the desert and refusing to answer my letters. I need you to deposit $5,000 into my inmate account immediately. I need to buy decent soap, bottled water, and extra blankets. The process is simple. You just log on to the federal inmate portal and enter my identification number. I will text it to you. Do it tonight, Eileen. I cannot survive another week living like an animal. She pauses, waiting for my obedient confirmation. She expects the familiar quiet sigh of surrender she heard for 34 years. She anticipates the seamless transfer of my hard-earned resources to insulate her from the consequences of her own staggering greed. I let the silence stretch. I allow the dead air to hang on the encrypted line, heavy and undeniable. The silence is not born of hesitation or lingering guilt. It is a calculated, deliberate pause. I am savoring the profound power of the shifted dynamic. I am tasting the pure, unfiltered freedom of possessing the ultimate upper hand. Eileen Diane snaps a brief flash of her old, commanding arrogance surfacing through her panic. Did you hear what I said? I need that deposit tonight. This is not a request. I am your mother, and you will help me. I look out at the horizon. The sun dips lower, painting the ocean surface in brilliant shades of violet and crushed ruby. A deep, enduring calm settles over my chest. The emotional tether that once bound me to her toxic demands is gone, leaving no scar, no phantom pain. I hold the heavy polymer phone steady against my cheek. I do not raise my voice. I do not offer a lecture on morality or a bitter recap of her crimes. The time for negotiating with emotional terrorists is over. I am sorry, I reply, my voice smooth, quiet, and echoing with unyielding finality. I do not use this federal device for personal calls anymore. Before she can form a single syllable of protest, before she can unleash a hysterical scream or hurl a desperate insult, I pull the device away from my ear. I press the red icon on the digital display. The line goes dead with a sharp, definitive click. The harsh static of the prison connection vanishes instantly, replaced by the soothing, rhythmic crash of the Pacific waves breaking against the cliffs below. I open the security settings on the encrypted interface. I select the incoming number log. With a single tap of my index finger, I add the high security holding facility to the permanent block list. The heavy, rusted iron door to my past swings shut, the lock sliding into place with a satisfying, irreversible finality. Diane will never reach this line again. Paul will never intercept another piece of my mail. Cameron will never treat my sanctuary as a stepping stone for his delusional ambitions. They are ghosts haunting a concrete purgatory permanently excised from the narrative of my life. I set the heavy black phone back onto the glass table. I take a deep breath of the cooling evening air. The sunset reaches its peak, igniting the California sky in a breathtaking display of color and light. I reach into my canvas bag resting near the patio chair and retrieve a secure government tablet. The screen illuminates, displaying a series of highly classified diplomatic briefings requiring my immediate authorization. The work is demanding, complex, and vital to the security of the nation. It is the work I was born to do, unimpeded by the frantic, draining demands of superficial predators. I lean forward, resting my elbows on my knees, my eyes scanning the encrypted text. A profound sense of empowerment washes over me. The karmic balance is restored. The toxic rot was cut away, allowing the healthy tissue to thrive in the open air. I am the sole author of my future. I sit alone in my impenetrable coastal fortress, unburdened, untouchable, and entirely at peace, watching the brilliant sun sink below the edge of the world. There is a pervasive, almost sacred mythology woven into the fabric of American culture. From the moment we are old enough to comprehend the world, we are sold the image of the traditional family as an impenetrable fortress. We are taught that blood is an unbreakable bond, that loyalty to our parents is a debt we are born owing, and that the ultimate measure of a life well lived is a manicured lawn, a comfortable retirement, and children who mirror our grandest ambitions. But what happens when that manicured lawn hides a rotting, unstable foundation? What happens when the sacred institution of the family mutates into a parasitic entity, bleeding one child dry to artificially inflate the hollow ego of another? The story of Eileen Haas, a high-ranking diplomat forced to watch her parents orchestrate their own federal downfall in a desperate bid to fund her brother's delusions, is far more than a high-stakes thriller about espionage and diplomatic safehouses. At its absolute core, it is a devastating, profoundly relatable mirror reflecting the catastrophic failure of parenting, devoid of fairness, honesty, and emotional awareness. It is a cautionary tale about the darkest shadows of the American family dynamic, where the obsessive pursuit of status and the idolatry of a golden child can literally burn a legacy to the ground. In the modern American landscape, particularly in hyper-competitive pressure cookers like Silicon Valley, there is a dangerous temptation to view children not as independent souls to be nurtured, but as extensions of a parent's own ego. Paul and Diane Haas fell into this trap, assigning their son Cameron the role of the visionary. He was the golden child, the charming, entitled heir destined for tech greatness. To maintain this delusion, they stripped him of the most vital, foundational tools a parent can possibly provide: accountability, emotional resilience, and the capacity for honest self-reflection. They fundamentally confused indulging their son with loving him. They padded his every fall, bailed out his every financial failure, and shielded him from the natural consequences of his own laziness. In doing so, they raised a man who possessed the moral fortitude of wet paper. When the federal agents kicked down their front door, Cameron did not stand by the father who had just risked decades in a maximum security prison to fund his lifestyle. He instantly, hysterically, threw his parents to the wolves. This is the tragic, inevitable harvest of unequal parenting. When you raise a child to believe they are the center of the universe, you cannot feign surprise when they gladly sacrifice you to maintain their orbit. Conversely, Eileen was assigned the role of the worker bee, the emotional and financial shock absorber. Her parents demanded unyielding family responsibility from her, while offering absolutely none in return. They looked at her demanding honorable career in public service and saw only a stagnant resource to be plundered for their favored son's benefit. They forged her name, stole her property, and inadvertently handed state secrets to a foreign spy ring, all under the toxic, manipulative guise of family duty. They weaponized the very concept of family, twisting it from a source of mutual support and unconditional love into an instrument of profound exploitation. Eileen's harrowing journey forces us to confront a deeply uncomfortable, agonizing reality. Sometimes, the people who demand the most loyalty are the exact ones who deserve it the least. If you have ever felt like the invisible pillar holding up a crumbling household, if you have ever been asked to set your own boundaries on fire to keep someone else's golden child warm, you are not alone. These dynamics thrive in the dark, hidden behind closed oak doors, perfect holiday cards, and curated dining room tables. That is why we share these narratives. It is why we bring these hidden, painful truths into the light. If Eileen's journey of severing toxic ties and reclaiming her profound self-worth resonates with you, I encourage you to subscribe and follow Amanda Told Stories. Here we delve into the most intense, real-life narratives every single day, building a community of listeners who understand that sometimes walking away is the ultimate act of self-preservation. Join us as we continue to explore the incredible, unyielding resilience of the human spirit. Looking back at the smoldering wreckage of the Haas family, the overarching lesson regarding long-term guidance for children becomes crystal clear. True parenting is not about securing venture capital for your offspring, nor is it about maintaining a flawless, wealthy facade for the neighbors at the country club. True family responsibility is rooted in the grueling, unglamorous, and often painful work of emotional awareness. It requires the immense courage to look at your children fairly, to discipline them honestly, and to recognize that true, enduring love involves saying the word no. Paul and Diane's greatest crime was not just wire fraud forgery or international espionage. Their original fatal sin was their absolute failure to parent with integrity. They believed they could cheat the complex system of life just as easily as they cheated a county title transfer. They believed they could manufacture a successful family without putting in the honest emotional labor required to sustain one. We are constantly told by society that a parent's ultimate duty is to sacrifice everything for their children, to pave the road ahead of them so they never have to stumble. But here is a philosophical truth that flies directly in the face of our conventional sentimental conditioning. Unconditional love should never, under any circumstances, mean unconditional access, and biology is not a binding contract for abuse. The most destructive force in a child's life is not hardship. It is not financial struggle, nor is it the experience of failure. The most destructive force is the blind, entitled enablement of a parent who refuses to let their child fall. When we elevate a manufactured image of family loyalty above basic human decency, we do not protect our children. We destroy them. We turn them into predators or prey, completely incapable of surviving the harsh, unyielding machinery of the real world. Eileen, sitting on her coastal patio, sipping dark roast coffee while the sun sets over the Pacific, is not a tragedy of a broken family. It is a breathtaking triumph of karmic balance. She did not destroy her parents. She simply stepped out of the way and allowed the overwhelming gravity of their own arrogant choices to pull them under. She recognized that the title of mother or father is an active verb, a daily, grueling practice of respect and care, not a permanent, unrevocable title that excuses treason, theft, and emotional neglect. As the screen fades to black on Eileen's story, it leaves us staring into the cold, reflective glass of our own lives. We are forced to ask ourselves difficult, haunting questions about the structures we are building and the roles we are quietly, passively accepting. Look closely at the foundation of your own home, at the unspoken rules and the invisible debts you carry. Are you demanding a respect you haven't truly earned? Or are you paying an emotional toll to a toll booth that shouldn't even exist? Are the walls of your sanctuary built with the heavy, lead-lined truth of emotional honesty, capable of withstanding the fiercest storms of life? Or are they made of forged paper and fragile illusions, just waiting for a single, quiet distress signal to bring the entire roof crashing down on your head?